Hi guys. Tonight we step into the chill of a medieval dawn, where the stones of a vast grey castle hold the breath of winter itself. You can almost feel the cold creeping through your woolen cloak as the sound of bells echoes from the chapel tower, ringing out over the courtyard like silver ripples in frozen air. The year has turned. It is Christmas morning, a time of reverence, feasting, and a little mischief that even the holiest cleric secretly enjoys. You are here, in the heart of the 15th century, ready to experience what Christmas truly felt like behind thick stone walls and beneath the flicker of 1,000 candles. You probably wouldn't survive this world, though. No central heating, no coffee, and definitely no Wi-Fi. Still, there's something magical about it, isn't there? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. You awaken in the small stone chamber that passes for luxury in a castle. Your breath fogs in the dim air. Frost has painted delicate feathers on the inside of your narrow window, and a thread of dawn glows faintly beyond it. Somewhere down in the courtyard, a stable boy coughs, the sound sharp as a snapped twig. Then the bells begin to toll. Slow, solemn, insistent. They mark the start of Christmas Day. You wrap your cloak tighter and move toward the window. The castle is stirring. Smoke curls from a few chimneys, and the frost on the roofs catches pale light like powdered silver. A handful of servants hurry across the yard carrying baskets of kindling, their breath visible in the air. It smells faintly of pine and cold iron. The air is so crisp it could crack. You rub your hands together and glance toward the great hall. There's motion there already. Torches being lit, shutters thrown open to welcome daylight, dogs stretching before the hearth. This is not a silent, holy night anymore. It's the practical, bustling morning after, when even sacred joy must be managed like any other task. You hear voices from the corridor, two servants whispering about the chapel. Apparently, the priest insisted on extra candles for the dawn mass, though wax is expensive and the steward grumbled all night about the cost. Yet Christmas comes only once a year, and even the steward knows better than to argue too long with a priest. You walk down the cold passage, your boots crunching on rushes scattered across the stone floor. They smell faintly of herbs, sweet marjoram and lavender, meant to mask less pleasant odors. The castle walls close around you, their rough surfaces sweating faintly with condensation. Somewhere, a mouse scurries. The main staircase opens onto the courtyard, where you find yourself bathed in the pale light of a rising Sunday breath clouds from your lips, and your fingers ache from the cold. Yet you can't help pausing to take it all in. The fluttering banners, the sound of the smith's hammer ringing once as he checks his tools, the distant bleating of sheep from beyond the walls. It's said that a good castle wakes like a living thing. The bells are its heartbeat, the servants are its blood, the lord and lady its mind and spirit. And you, standing here on the threshold of Christmas Day, are both witness and participant in a rhythm that has been repeating for centuries. Up near the chapel, two pages tug at a pine garland heavy with snow. They shake it off and laugh as flakes scatter into their hair. One of them sneezes loudly and is immediately shushed by a stern older maid. She mutters something about keeping reverence on the Saviour's morning. Still, there's a glimmer of warmth in her voice. A historical record tells us that in some English castles around the 12th and 13th centuries, Christmas morning began even before sunrise with the ringing of the Angelus bell, calling everyone to prayer. But not everyone obeyed. Some slept through it, especially after the night's drinking. Others attended more out of habit than faith. Historians still debate whether such early devotions were genuine acts of piety or simply part of the social expectation that held medieval households together. You make your way toward the chapel door. The frost crunches beneath your boots, and you pass a young kitchen boy carrying a bucket of ale to warm by the fire. He gives a quick, nervous bow. You can tell he's new, his tunic's too clean, his hands not yet red from scrubbing pots. The chapel stands slightly apart from the main hall, its narrow windows glowing faintly with the reflection of torchlight. You can smell the resin of pine garlands already hung above the door, mingled with wax and incense. It's beautiful in a cold, austere way. A gust of wind carries a faint sound of music, someone testing a small pipe or flute in the distance. Perhaps one of the minstrels rehearsing for later. The melody is brief and sweet, vanishing quickly into the morning air. Inside, the space feels smaller than you expect, every sound amplified by stone. The floor is damp, and your breath seems to linger longer here. The priest kneels at the altar, whispering in Latin. You catch only fragments, words of joy, words of humility. A young acolyte shuffles beside him, trying not to trip over his own robes. You slip into a bench, feeling the cold seep through the wood. Your fingers brush against a carved cross someone etched there decades ago. The faint scratchiness under your fingertips makes you think of the countless people who've sat here before you, whispering their own worries to the same silent walls. Outside, the bells ring again, longer this time. The sound fills the chapel and seems to settle into your bones. You close your eyes. And then, faintly, you smell something unexpected, sweet smoke, almost floral. Someone must have added rosemary or dried lavender to the brazier, an old custom meant to drive away winter's illness. It was once believed that certain herbs carried the power to repel both plague and bad spirits. Whether or not it worked, the air feels softer, less cruel. As the priest rises to begin the Mass, you glance around the small congregation. Nobles in fur-lined cloaks, servants keeping to the back, children blinking sleepily in the candlelight. Every face glows gold under the flames. And there, for a moment you feel it, that fragile balance between devotion and exhaustion, holiness and human need. The castle may be vast, but in this hour, everyone breathes the same air, listens to the same echoing Latin, and hopes for the same small warmth. The bells fade into silence. The dawn is full upon you now. The first day of Christmas in the castle has begun. The light creeps slowly through the arrow-slit window as the sun climbs higher, painting narrow stripes of gold across the stone walls. You can almost hear the castle yawning awake. In the great hall below, the fires are being coaxed back to life after a long night of embers and ash. The smell of damp wood mingles with the sharp scent of smoke as servants hurry to stoke every hearth before the Lord and Lady descend. You make your way down the spiral staircase, each step uneven and worn from countless feet before yours. The air grows warmer with every turn, and when you reach the bottom, you're greeted by the dull roar of crackling flames and the murmur of voices. The hall feels like the heart of the castle, pulsing with preparation. The first thing you notice is the glow. Candles burn in their sconces, their wax dripping in soft ribbons down iron holders. The great fire pit blazes in the center, smoke twisting up through the opening in the roof. Servants dart in and out, their faces flushed and hair tousled, arms full of wood, linens and garlands. The second thing you notice is the smell: roasting oats, melting tallow, and the faint sweetness of mead warming near the fire. It's comforting, in a rough sort of way. You pause by one of the long tables as a maid spreads fresh rushes along the floor. She hums to herself, a tune both merry and haunting. It's an old carol about the birth of Christ and the turning of the year, one that probably started in a village tavern before ever reaching noble ears. Songs travelled faster than letters back then. At the far end of the hall, the steward stands with a tablet of wax, checking names off his list. His voice cuts through the bustle as he assigns tasks. 2 for the kitchen, 1 for the stables, 3 for the chapel garlands. He's all brisk motion and irritation, though you can tell he's secretly proud of how smoothly it all runs. A curious historical note drifts through your mind. The very idea of a castle Christmas morning was a strange mixture of sacred duty and theatrical pageantry. Records from noble households in the 14th century describe how the day began not only with prayer, but also with performance. The servants' efficiency was as much for display as necessity. Visitors would judge the household by its order, its scent, even the shine on its candlesticks. You move toward the fire, drawn by its warmth. Sparks leap like tiny stars, and your skin tingles as the chill fades from your fingers. Nearby, two scullions argue quietly about whether the Yule log should last 12 nights or only one. It's an old debate. Some chroniclers say that keeping the log burning through all 12 days of Christmas ensured prosperity for the coming year. Others insist that only the ashes mattered, to be mixed into the next year's fire for luck. Historians still argue which version came first. The hall feels alive now. A dog pads across the rushes, tail wagging, as a kitchen boy tosses him a crust of bread. A lady's maid hurries through with a basket of clean linens for the upper rooms. Somewhere above, the faint twang of a lute hints that one of the musicians has woken early to tune his strings. You glance up toward the dais where the high table will soon be laid. It's empty for now, the trestles bare, but the servants have already placed a few sprigs of holly along the edges. The red berries gleam against the dull wood like drops of blood. Holly was a favorite decoration because it stayed green when all else died. Some said it symbolized the thorns of Christ's crown. Others whispered it kept witches from crossing thresholds. Both explanations seem to coexist peacefully here. The castle's mistress enters quietly from the side door. She wears a fur-lined gown, her hair braided with ribbons the color of winter roses. The servants bow and part for her as she walks to the fire. Her expression is serene but alert, the practiced calm of someone who must balance dignity with endless small worries. She asks the steward if the musicians are ready and whether the Lord's cup has been polished for the morning ceremony. He nods quickly, scribbling notes on his wax board. You watch her gaze sweep the hall. When she catches your eye, she smiles faintly and nods a small acknowledgement, yet somehow enough to warm you more than the fire. Then she turns toward the chapel, murmuring to her maid about offering garlands for the Virgin's altar. There's a rhythm to everything here. The ringing of bells, the clatter of wooden trenchers being set out, the echo of footsteps in the corridor. It feels ancient and rehearsed, as if every person in the castle has known since birth what must happen today. You wander toward the long windows that overlook the courtyard. The sunlight outside is pale, but growing stronger. Snow sparkles across the ground like powdered glass. A few stable boys lead the horses to the well, their laughter echoing faintly against the walls. You see steam rise from the animals' nostrils, curling upward like ghostly ribbons. Behind you, someone begins singing a low, melodic chant. A group of kitchen maids join in softly, harmonizing on a refrain about peace and good harvests. Their voices are imperfect but soothing. For a moment, the hall feels like a cathedral, filled with the warmth of human breath and belief. One of the older servants, her hair streaked with grey, catches your attention as she polishes a brass platter. They say the first fire of Christmas should never go out, she tells you, half smiling. Else bad luck will chase the house till Candlemas. You nod, unsure whether she truly believes it or just likes the sound of her own superstition. A memory stirs in your mind, something you read once about a manor in Norfolk where servants used to dance around the Yule log before breakfast, chanting to keep the flame alive. The chronicler admitted he wasn't sure whether it was pagan nonsense or good Christian fun. He leaned toward both, depending on his mood. As the morning stretches, the Lord himself appears at the far end of the hall. The crowd falls silent for a heartbeat, then bows. He's tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a mantle of deep crimson lined with fur. His boots are damp from the courtyard snow. A gold chain glints at his throat, catching the firelight. He surveys the hall, nods in satisfaction, and calls for wine thin and spiced, suitable for the hour. The cup is brought swiftly, and he drinks deeply before handing it to his lady. Together, they exchange a few words too quiet to hear, then sit before the fire. Outside, the bells ring again, this time from the outer gate, a signal for those still lingering in the stables or yard to prepare for Mass. The sound rolls through the air like a promise and a warning. You take one last look around the hall, the flickering light, The smell of smoke, the hum of readiness. Christmas has only just begun, and already it feels like the castle is holding its breath for something grander to come. The chapel has fallen quiet again, its last hymn fading into the cold morning air. You step out into the corridor, your breath forming faint clouds as you move toward the heart of the castle. The stone feels colder here, shaded from the rising Sunday. Somewhere below, the clatter of pots and the thump of boots remind you that sacred stillness never lasts long in a household this busy. You follow the sound of voices until you reach a small side passage that leads toward the chapel door. The scent changes before you even see it. Pine resin, beeswax, and a faint trace of incense drift through the air. The closer you get, the warmer it feels, as if the very act of preparation gives off its own kind of heat. Inside, the chapel looks transformed. What was dark and austere at dawn now glows with an understated beauty. Evergreens have been woven into garlands that hang over the pews. Clusters of red berries add a hint of life to the grey stone walls. A few candles flicker on the altar, their flames mirrored in the polished silver chalices laid out for the morning service. According to surviving records from noble households, decorating the chapel on Christmas morning was one of the most anticipated rituals of the year. It signaled not only devotion, but also the prosperity of the Lord who could afford fresh greenery and good wax. Even the simplest sprig of ivy had meaning. Its twisting form symbolized eternity, while holly represented endurance in hardship. These symbols were drawn as much from pagan reverence for the natural world as from Christian theology. Acolytes shuffle near the altar, their bare feet whispering across the flagstones. One of them hums softly as he polishes the brass candlesticks, his tune mingling with the faint hiss of burning wax. The priest stands by the lectern, head bent over his missal. His lips move in silent rehearsal, as though he fears forgetting the Latin words at the height of the service. You notice how his fingers tremble slightly when he lifts the chalice to inspect its shine. Maybe it is the cold, or maybe the weight of ceremony. Curiously enough, one small superstition lingers among the servants, that if the priest drops anything during Christmas Mass, the coming year will bring illness to the household. You overhear one maid whisper this to another, both crossing themselves quickly before returning to their work. It is a little thing, and yet no one laughs at it. The light from the narrow windows falls in slanted beams across the floor. Dust motes shimmer in the air, catching the glow like tiny stars. You step closer to the altar rail, feeling the faint warmth of the candles on your face. Someone has placed a carved wooden manger beside the pulpit, its small straw bed ready for the infant Christ figure to be laid inside once Mass begins. According to accounts from Benedictine monasteries, even castles adopted the practice of building small cribs at Christmas after St. Francis of Assisi popularized the tradition in the early 13th century. Before that, most people experienced the Nativity only through scripture or song. Now, they could see and touch a physical symbol of it, even in the remotest fortress. You watch as the priest's assistant carefully sets out the missal and gestures for the choir boy to light another candle. The boy stretches awkwardly, nearly tipping the holder, and earns a stern look for his trouble. The flicker of flame catches the boy's anxious face, and you can't help but smile. Some details of human nature never change. Behind you, the lady of the castle enters, her cloak brushing against the rushes. Two maids follow, carrying baskets filled with extra greenery. They move with practiced ease, placing ivy above the choir stalls and twisting garlands around the stone pillars. The smell of sap fills the air, earthy and sweet. When they finish, the chapel feels alive, as if the forest itself has crept indoors to witness the holy day. Among the more eccentric traditions of the era, some households believed that hanging mistletoe inside the chapel would invite angelic protection. Others condemned it as too pagan. The compromise, according to one old scribe, was to hang it secretly behind the altar, that heaven might see it, though men should not. Whether anyone still follows that rule here, you cannot tell. As the preparations draw to a close, the priest clears his throat and gestures toward the doorway. Servants begin filing out quietly, leaving only a faint murmur behind them. The moment they go, the silence feels profound, as if the air itself holds its breath. You can almost sense centuries of prayers layered invisibly in these walls, like smoke that never fully disperses. No clear consensus exists among historians about how strictly noble families observed the religious parts of Christmas. Some argue that genuine faith guided their rituals. Others claim it was more about social display and prestige. The truth probably lies somewhere between, shifting with each generation's priorities. In this castle, though, the reverence feels real. The gestures may be rehearsed, but the hush is sincere. The bells begin again outside, calling everyone to the morning mass. The sound rises through the courtyard, echoing against the ramparts. Inside the chapel, it trembles the air, making the candle flames dance. You take one last look at the altar, the silver, the greenery, the small wooden crib, and realize how carefully balance is maintained here between earthly beauty and heavenly intent. The priest lifts his head. The acolytes straighten. It is time. You step back into the corridor as the first notes of chant begin to rise, low and resonant, weaving through the cold morning air. The smell of pine clings to your sleeves, and behind you the great wooden door closes with a deep, echoing thud. The chapel fills slowly, breath by breath, until the space hums with anticipation. The air feels denser now, charged with incense and murmured prayer. A faint mist of breath rises above bowed heads, and the stone walls hold the warmth of bodies packed close together. You find your place near the side, close enough to see the altar, but far enough to remain unnoticed. The priest stands at its center, wrapped in heavy vestments of embroidered gold thread. His voice, when it begins, rolls out like a river, steady and deliberate. The Latin syllables blend into a rhythm that feels older than memory. Some chroniclers from the 14th century mention that Christmas Day Mass often began in near darkness, with only a few candles burning, to symbolize the light of Christ entering a dark world. Gradually, more candles were lit until the entire chapel shone. The effect was theatrical, yet deeply moving, even to those who couldn't follow a single word of Latin. The choir begins softly. Boys' voices lift and tremble, echoing against the cold stone. The melody feels both mournful and exultant, as if joy itself must fight its way through the frost. You close your eyes for a moment and let the sound wash over you. A curious little detail survives in letters from a bishop who complained that nobles often sang too loudly, trying to outshine the choir during the Gloria. He claimed their vanity disturbed the sanctity of the Mass. Judging from the way a few knights here belt out the refrain, perhaps not much has changed. The priest lifts the chalice. The congregation kneels. The smell of wine and burning wax fills the air. For a moment, all noise fades except for the faint pop of the fire in the brazier and the low hum of chant. You can almost imagine that every breath, every sound, every glimmer of candlelight is part of one enormous heartbeat. A servant beside you stifles a sneeze. He blushes furiously as the sound echoes down the aisle, earning a few disapproving looks. The priest doesn't pause, though, and the chant continues its solemn rhythm. Contemporary sources reveal that attending Christmas Mass was mandatory for nearly everyone in a noble household, from the lord's family to the lowliest scullion. Failing to appear could mean punishment or lost privileges. Yet despite the formality, these services were not always solemn. Some chroniclers describe laughter, whispered gossip, and even the occasional dozing guard propped against a pillar. Faith and fatigue often shared the same bench. No agreement exists among experts about how devout medieval nobility truly were. Some argue their attendance at Mass was more a political performance, affirming their authority as defenders of Christendom. Others see genuine belief in the private prayers recorded in household books and personal letters. The truth, as always, lingers somewhere between sincerity and spectacle. The priest raises the host. The congregation bows deeper, some whispering their own petitions. The sound of armor creaks as knights shift their knees on the stone floor. You catch a whiff of fur and cold iron mingled with candle smoke. The contrast is oddly beautiful, sacred light glinting on weapons meant for war. When the organ begins to play, it's little more than a breathy wheeze of air through pipes, yet it fills the chapel like a living thing. The notes tremble and echo, rippling across the crowd. You can feel the vibration in your ribs. Beside the altar, a boy swings the censer, scattering trails of perfumed smoke through the air. The scent is both sweet and metallic, like burning honey mixed with iron. You watch the tendrils curl upward and vanish in the vaults. An elderly knight kneels nearby, his hands trembling slightly as he clasps them together. His lips move in prayer, but his eyes are fixed on the ceiling. Perhaps he's remembering a lost son or a battle he barely survived. The Mass gives him a moment to feel both sorrow and peace without speaking either aloud. When the final hymn begins, the congregation rises slowly. The chant builds deep and warm, filling every crevice of the chapel until it feels like the walls themselves are singing. You feel the sound vibrate through the soles of your boots, through your chest, through the cold air that separates you from the others. Then it ends. The silence that follows is immense, almost tangible. You can hear the faint clink of the chalice being set down, the rustle of robes, a single cough. Outside, the bells begin their joyous peal again. This time, they sound lighter, faster, as if the castle itself breathes easier now that the holy duty is complete. You file out with the others, blinking as daylight strikes your eyes. The courtyard glitters under a thin dusting of snow. The air smells of smoke, pine, and freshly baked bread drifting from the kitchens. The world feels both sacred and practical again. Near the door, a young acolyte leans against the wall, exhaling in relief. "That went better than last year," he mutters. "No one fainted this time." His friend laughs softly. You smile as you pass them, reminded that history, even in its grandest form, is always full of tiny human moments like this. The castle hums with new energy now. Servants hurry back to their posts, cooks shout orders from the kitchens, and somewhere a musician plucks a cheerful tune. The serious part of the day is over. The feasting and laughter are about to begin. The sunlight slants brighter across the courtyard as the congregation spills out from the chapel. The air rings with chatter and laughter, a release of tension after the stillness of worship. You can feel the change in atmosphere almost like a physical shift, as if the entire castle exhales at once. A horn sounds from the inner gate, a bright, brassy note that carries across the yard. Servants pause for a heartbeat, then spring into motion. It is time for the morning gift, the traditional offering from the Lord to his household. This is not charity, though it pretends to be. It is performance, power, and ritual all bound together in silk ribbon. According to chronicles from the 12th century, the morning gift began as a token a husband gave his wife on the day after their wedding, often in the form of land or gold. Over time, noble households expanded the custom, turning it into a Christmas act of generosity from lord to servant. It reminded everyone where their blessings came from. The lord and lady appear on the balcony above the hall doors, wrapped in fur and fine wool. The sunlight catches the embroidery on their sleeves, tiny threads glinting like frost. Below them, the household gathers in rough order, from knights in heavy cloaks to kitchen boys with chapped hands. The steward steps forward with a chest of coins. The lid creaks open, revealing stacks of silver pennies, polished to a dull gleam. The lord raises his hand, his voice clear and deep. He speaks a few words of blessing, then calls the names one by one. Each servant approaches, bows, and receives a small pouch or folded cloth, sometimes even a loaf of fine white bread. Curiously, some accounts note that these gifts were carefully recorded in household ledgers, not for sentiment but for taxation. A servant who failed to appear might forfeit his next week's ale ration, while a knight who refused the Lord's coin could be seen as insulted or plotting. You sense that even kindness here carries weight. Beside you, two young maids whisper excitedly about what they might receive. "A ribbon, perhaps," one says. Last year he gave scarlet thread. The other giggles. Then I shall sew it into my sleeve, so everyone knows I'm favoured. Their laughter is soft and quick, fading as the steward glares in their direction. The gifts continue. A falconer receives a new hood for his bird, a musician, a small pouch of cloves, a guard, a new belt. You notice the difference in how each person bows, the angle of the neck, the duration of the glance. Every movement is both gratitude and performance. Evidence from manorial records reveals that even humble gifts like salt or cloth could hold enormous meaning. Salt, expensive and vital, was a symbol of status and preservation. Cloth hinted at prosperity because weaving required time and labor. What seems small to you would have been treasured in a world where every color and spice cost weeks of work. A hush falls as a group of children are brought forward, the castle's youngest servants, messengers, and pages. The lord crouches slightly to meet their eyes. He presses a small coin into each small hand, smiling as they stammer thanks. For a moment, his voice softens, and the formality slips. Then he straightens again, the mask of command restored. In some regions, nobles added a second layer to this ritual, offering gifts to neighboring peasants who lived on their lands. The act was both benevolent and strategic, ensuring loyalty in harsh winters. Yet not every castle practiced it. Some chroniclers argue that true generosity came only from monasteries, while others claim the lords simply liked an audience for their mercy. The debate remains unresolved, though the pattern of expectation is clear. To be noble meant to be seen giving. As the ceremony ends, the steward closes the chest and bows. The courtyard erupts in motion again, servants hurrying off to hide their treasures before returning to their work. A young guard lifts his coin to the light and grins, as if fortune itself has landed in his palm. The lord lingers on the balcony, exchanging quiet words with his lady. You can see the faint frost of their breath as they talk. Perhaps they're discussing the feast, or perhaps the guests who will soon arrive. Behind them, the banners flutter gently in the wind, the family crest catching light like a flash of memory. A lesser-known detail mentioned in letters between noble women suggests that ladies often prepared small personal gifts for their closest attendants: embroidered handkerchiefs, carved combs, or even jars of rosewater. These tokens were not recorded in ledgers but whispered about in corridors, creating subtle hierarchies among the servants themselves. When the balcony empties, you stand for a moment in the open courtyard. The bells have stopped. The air feels still again, broken only by the distant clang of metal from the kitchens. Somewhere behind a shuttered window, you hear laughter and the faint clatter of plates being stacked. You think about how this ceremony, so full of grace and ritual, holds a quiet tension underneath. The coins, the bows, the blessings, all part of the endless choreography that keeps the castle's world turning. Everyone knows their place, and every gesture reminds them to stay there. A boy runs past you, clutching a pouch of grain with both hands. "For the doves," he calls out, beaming. You follow him with your eyes as he vanishes around the corner toward the stables. His joy is so pure, it almost breaks the heavy mood left behind. The courtyard begins to empty. The sun has climbed high enough to melt thin patches of frost along the walls, and droplets fall like tiny crystals to the stones below. You can smell bread, meat, and sweet spices drifting through the open door of the great hall. The feast is coming, and with it, the kind of chaos that only Christmas can justify. You take a slow breath, feeling the cold air fill your chest. Above you, pigeons scatter from the tower, their wings flashing white against the blue winter sky. The morning gift has been given. The castle turns its attention now toward fire, music, and the irresistible promise of food. You follow the scent of roasting meat through a side corridor that leads to the kitchens. The stone walls grow warmer as you descend, and the air thickens with the smells of smoke, spices, and something faintly sweet. By the time you reach the lower level, the noise is overwhelming. Voices shout, pans clang, and the rhythmic thud of knives striking wooden blocks beats like a drum. The kitchen is a world apart from the solemn chapel and polished hall. Here, the rules bend and language changes. Servants speak in half sentences, gestures, and quick nods. The head cook, a broad woman with flour on her cheeks, stands at the center of it all, barking orders while stirring a pot large enough to drown a child. Her sleeves are rolled, her hair tied back, and her expression could freeze milk. From a nearby alcove, a line of helpers works furiously to clean and prepare the meats. Boar, venison, and fowl lie in neat rows on wooden tables. The smell is primal, rich with blood and salt. A boy with red hair drags a bucket of water that sloshes with each step, leaving a trail across the floor. He looks barely 12, but moves with the weariness of someone twice his age. According to inventories from noble households of the late 14th century, Christmas feasts demanded nearly triple the usual kitchen staff. Some castles even borrowed extra cooks from nearby monasteries. It was a point of pride to have so much food that no table could hold it all. The abundance was proof of wealth, power, and divine favor. Near the hearth, spits turn slowly, each one bearing a different prize. A whole boar glistens with honey glaze, its tusks wrapped in silver foil. Chickens, stuffed with herbs, rotate beside it, their skin crackling as the fat drips into the fire. The sound is hypnotic, a symphony of sizzling and popping that seems to fill every corner of the room. A curious little superstition survives among the cooks. They believe that if the fire goes out on Christmas Day, bad luck will follow the household for the next year. To prevent this, someone must always keep watch, even through the night. One of the older men sits by the hearth now, poking at the embers and muttering a prayer to St. Lawrence, patron of cooks and martyrs. The air near the ovens feels almost tropical. Sweat runs down faces and soaks through wool tunics. You catch the scent of cloves and cinnamon, their sharp sweetness cutting through the heavy meat aroma. A young woman carries a tray of pies past you, the crusts golden and still steaming. She moves with careful precision, balancing the tray like a holy relic. Contemporary cookbooks, written mostly in French or Latin, reveal a dazzling variety of dishes that appeared on noble tables during Christmas. There were sauces of almond milk and saffron, pasties filled with minced eel, and puddings thickened with wine and breadcrumbs. One manuscript even describes a recipe for mock eggs, small pastries shaped like real eggs, filled with colored sugar and scented with rosewater. Historians marvel at the creativity, though some wonder whether these elaborate inventions were ever more than showpieces. You step aside as a pair of boys hurry past with a roasting pan so large they must carry it between them. The smell that follows is divine. "Peacock," one of them says proudly, "for the Lord's table." You glance back to see the bird, feathers restored after roasting, tail spread in a shimmering fan. It looks like something from a dream, half meal, half miracle. A lesser-known detail in household notes from Burgundy mentions that the feathers of such birds were often reattached after cooking to make the dish more impressive. The effect was startling, like watching a creature resurrected by heat and hunger. It is artistry born of appetite. Across the room, a pot of mulled wine bubbles over the fire. The liquid glows deep red in the light, and the scent of oranges and spice fills the air. A cook dips a ladle to taste, smacks his lips, then adds another stick of cinnamon. "Needs more bite," he says to no one in particular. No historian can agree on the exact number of courses served at a medieval Christmas feast. Some accounts speak of 7, others of 12, matching the holy days of the season. What is certain is that the first course began at midday, and the last often stretched past midnight. The feast was both celebration and endurance test, a ritual of consumption meant to remind everyone of the household's prosperity. A dog barks suddenly, startling a boy who drops a bowl of onions. The cook rounds on him with a glare fierce enough to melt butter. "You feed that mutt again, and I'll feed you to the swans," she snaps. The room bursts into laughter, and even she cracks a reluctant smile before turning back to her pot. Despite the frenzy, there is rhythm here, a kind of music in the chaos. You can hear it in the scrape of knives, the hiss of steam, the quick exchange of orders. It feels alive, almost joyful, as if every clatter and clang is part of the coming feast's overture. A young kitchen maid notices you lingering by the door. "Mind your toes," she says with a grin. "They'll roll a barrel through any second." Sure enough, a pair of servants wrestle a cask of ale into the corner, the wood thudding hard against the floor. They pop the seal, and the sharp scent of fermented grain joins the smoky air. You lean back against the wall, letting the heat soak into your skin. For all its chaos, there's a strange peace in watching people work like this. Every motion has purpose. Every person belongs. Somewhere above, the great hall awaits the meal. The cooks move faster now, ladling sauces, trimming edges, testing the heat of the bread ovens. The head cook shouts a final order, her voice cutting through the roar of flames. "No mistakes today," she says. "The Lord's eyes will be on us all." You glance up toward the smoke vent, where sunlight filters faintly through the haze. The kitchen feels like a forge of devotion, fueled by sweat, fire, and hunger. It is not holiness in the way of chapels or saints, but in the way of work, the endless human need to create warmth from the cold. The heat of the kitchen lingers on your skin as you climb back toward the upper levels of the castle. The smell of roasting meats follows you like a loyal hound, curling through the stairwell and mingling with the colder scents of stone and smoke. When you step into the corridor that leads toward the great hall, another aroma greets you, sharp, sweet, and dizzying. It is spice, precious and foreign, the true treasure of Christmas. Inside a small side chamber, you find the spice keeper. Every castle has one, though few outsiders ever see the place. The walls are lined with jars of clay and small chests bound in iron. The air feels almost alive, pulsing with scent: cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, ginger, and pepper. You can taste it on your tongue even without breathing deeply. According to merchants' ledgers preserved in Venice and Bruges, spices were among the most expensive commodities of the medieval world. A single pound of cinnamon might cost a month's wages for a craftsman. Pepper was so valued that it sometimes served as rent or currency. To scatter it freely over meat or wine was a public declaration of wealth. Every granule told a story of ships, deserts, and danger. The steward enters behind you, carrying a small wax tablet. He checks each jar like a banker inspecting gold. His quill scratches faintly as he counts. You notice that every lid is sealed with twine and stamped with a wax mark, proof that no servant has pilfered the Lord's fortune one pinch at a time. Curiously, some household accounts mention that the spice keeper was often the only locked room besides the treasury and the Lord's bedchamber. The temptation was simply too great. A handful of cloves could buy a week of bread. Yet here, the jars remain sealed, their contents destined for today's feast. The steward opens one chest carefully. Inside, strips of dried ginger gleam faintly, pale gold under the candlelight. He nods with satisfaction and gestures for the maid beside him to carry them to the kitchen. Her eyes widen as the scent reaches her. For a moment, she looks as though she's handling relics rather than roots. According to trade maps drawn by Genoese merchants, most of these spices traveled from India or the Middle East, passing through the markets of Alexandria before reaching European ports. Their journey could take years. Each time the cargo changed hands, the price climbed higher. By the time it reached a northern castle, it was worth more than silver. Opinions differ among historians about how accurately medieval people understood where spices came from. Some scholars believe they imagined them growing on faraway mountains guarded by serpents. Others argue that merchants deliberately kept their roots secret to preserve the illusion of mystery. Either way, the idea of distance gave flavor a kind of magic. You lean closer to one of the open jars. The scent of clove hits you sharply, almost stinging your nose. It is warm, intoxicating, and oddly familiar. For a moment it blurs the centuries between your world and theirs. You can almost picture the sailors unloading sacks of it onto cold docks, traders counting coins by torchlight, and cooks in distant kitchens dreaming of how it might taste in their lord's wine. A maid nearby laughs softly as she measures a handful of cinnamon. "Careful," the steward warns, his tone dry. "One grain too much, and the Lord will smell the waste." She rolls her eyes, but obeys. There's affection in his scolding, the quiet familiarity of people who work together every day and know their small rebellions will go unnoticed, as long as nothing spills. In the corner, a young page polishes a silver spice box shaped like a tiny tower. It has several compartments, each one meant to hold a different powder. The intricate design glints under the torchlight, a mix of beauty and practicality. Many such boxes survive in museums, their surfaces worn smooth by generations of fingers. They were symbols of refinement, often passed down like heirlooms. A peculiar custom, mentioned in a 15th century household guide, suggests that guests were sometimes invited to smell the spice box before dinner. It was both entertainment and instruction, a way of displaying sophistication. Those who could name each scent correctly were considered well-bred. Those who sneezed too loudly were laughed at kindly but silently judged. You watch the steward lock the chests once more, his hands careful and deliberate. He pockets the key, nods to the servants, and leaves. The room feels strangely hollow when the door closes, as if the spices themselves sigh with boredom, waiting to dazzle at the feast. No clear evidence explains exactly how these ingredients first entered the Christmas tradition. Some scholars argue it began with monasteries seeking to recreate the gifts of the Magi, blending myrrh and frankincense with food as symbolic offerings. Others think the connection was purely sensory. In the darkness of winter, the warmth of exotic spice tasted like sunlight and salvation. You take one last look around the chamber. The candles flicker, casting slow-moving shadows across the walls. The scents linger, clinging to your clothes and skin. Even hours from now, as the feast begins, their traces will follow you, weaving invisibly through the noise and laughter of the hall. Stepping back into the corridor, the cold air feels cleaner, emptier, after the rich breath of that secret room. You hear footsteps echoing from the direction of the great hall, and the low hum of distant music. Somewhere, someone is testing a pipe or lute. The feast is drawing near. As you walk toward the sound, you realize that the true power of spice lies not just in taste, but in memory. Each scent binds the castle together, lords, cooks, and servants into one shared rhythm of hunger and celebration. The corridor widens as you approach the roasting yard, where the heart of the day's labor blazes in open air. The sound hits you first, a low, rhythmic roar of fire and crackling fat, the chatter of servants, and the bark of dogs circling the edge of the crowd. The air itself feels thick, shimmering with heat that smells of smoke, meat, and wood ash. The yard is alive. Great iron spits turn slowly above long trenches of glowing coals. Each one holds some noble prize: boar, venison, goose, and swan. The heat has turned their skin deep bronze, glistening with dripped honey and spice. Steam rises in ghostly ribbons toward the grey winter sky. According to surviving accounts from royal kitchens, such outdoor roasting pits were common during great feasts, not only because of their size, but to prevent the smoke from blackening the ceilings of stone halls. Some estates even had temporary wooden sheds built for the purpose, known as feast houses, which could be dismantled once the season ended. The efficiency was impressive, though the smell lingered for weeks. You step carefully through the bustle. Boys with sooty faces carry buckets of water from the well, while older servants tend the fires with long pokers. One man uses a goose feather to brush melted butter over a haunch of venison, humming a tune that drifts somewhere between prayer and drunken song. Nearby, a jester lounges on a barrel, his hat askew, bells chiming as he leans back to warm his hands. He hums softly, then bursts into a verse about Saint Stephen and the pig who ran faster than sin. The kitchen boys laugh until the cook throws a spoon at him. It misses by inches and clatters against the ground, drawing more laughter. Curiously, a letter from a nobleman in 1381 complains that jesters had a habit of mocking the clergy during feasts. and yet their presence was tolerated because laughter was believed to guard against evil spirits. "Better a fool's jest than a devil's whisper," he wrote. Watching this jester grin through the smoke, you suspect he might agree. The dogs circle closer to the fires, eyes gleaming, noses twitching. One snatches a dropped scrap of bread before being chased off with curses and laughter. The smell of singed fur and dripping fat mingles in the cold air, an odd but familiar perfume of medieval festivity. A small boy stands on a stool near the biggest spit, turning it slowly with both hands. His face is bright red from the heat, and his wool tunic smokes faintly at the edges. A guard nearby takes pity, handing him a cup of watered ale. "Keep turning, lad," the man says with a wink. "The boar won't baste itself." According to fragments of a 14th century cook's notebook, roasting was considered an art rather than a task. Each fire demanded careful tending, each cut of meat a specific rhythm of turning. It required patience and intuition. "A man may read the smoke," one note says, as others read the sky. Some scholars still disagree on how often such lavish roasts appeared in lesser castles. While the nobility prided themselves on excess, smaller lords might rely more on stews and pies to stretch their supplies. But during Christmas, even the poorest manor tried to produce at least one roasted animal, for the sight alone spoke of divine favor. You feel the heat growing stronger as you move closer to the center. The fires hiss when the cooks ladle wine over the meats, sealing in the flavor and sending bursts of steam skyward. A gust of wind blows the smoke into your face, and your eyes sting as you blink away tears. The world smells of salt, sugar, and fire. In one corner, a servant carves roasted apples to fill the mouth of the great boar that will later be carried in procession to the high table. The fruit glows red against the dark meat, a symbol of plenty and rebirth. "To sweeten the beast," she murmurs, half to herself. A curious old custom from northern France dictated that whoever first tasted the apple from the boar's mouth would enjoy good fortune in love. Of course, the apple was usually reserved for the lord himself, which conveniently ensured his continued luck. The jester picks up his lute and begins another tune, this one softer, weaving through the clang of metal and the crackle of fire. The rhythm is strangely hypnotic, a pulse that matches the slow turn of the spits. You catch yourself swaying slightly, lulled by the repetition. The head cook strides past, trailing authority like perfume. She stops beside one of the spits and nods approvingly. "Perfect," she says. "By noon, we'll have a feast to make angels jealous." Her words draw a cheer from the younger servants. Historians remain uncertain about the exact scale of medieval feasting. Some surviving menus describe dozens of dishes, while others list only a few grand ones repeated across tables. The truth probably varies with wealth and season. What is certain is that these roasts represented more than food. They were a visible expression of control over nature, fire, and hunger. The fires roar louder as another log is added. Sparks leap into the grey air, catching the light like fleeting stars. For a brief moment, the yard looks almost like a forge, where faith and appetite are hammered together into something larger than both. The jester raises his cup and shouts, "To the cooks, the fires, and whatever survives till nightfall." The servants laugh again, the sound bright and human against the endless crackle of flames. You stand for a while, letting the warmth soak into your bones. The cold world outside the yard feels distant, almost unreal. Here, within the smoke and laughter, life seems fuller, louder, more alive. A bell rings somewhere toward the hall, sharp and clear above the noise. The signal. The first dishes will soon be carried inside. The cooks spring into motion, shouting final orders, tightening ropes, brushing the meat one last time with honey and spice. You turn toward the doorway leading back to the castle, feeling the sudden shift from heat to cold as you leave the yard. The fires roar behind you, the smell of feast clinging to your clothes. It feels like you've stepped out of a living dream, carrying its warmth in your skin. You return to the great hall, where the air is changing from cold stone to something brighter, richer, alive with color and scent. The noise of the kitchens fades behind you, replaced by the soft crackle of fires and the rhythmic tap of ladders against beams. Servants swarm the room like bees, each carrying armfuls of greenery. The castle is dressing itself for Christmas. The hall stretches wide and high, its timber roof rising into dim rafters. The floor is strewn with new rushes mixed with dried lavender and rosemary, a small attempt at freshness. A few dogs lie by the hearth, watching lazily as people move about. The heat from the central fire paints a golden shimmer on the walls. According to chronicles from noble households, decorating with greenery at Christmastide was one of the few customs shared by nobles and peasants alike. The materials differed, but the purpose was the same: to remind everyone that life persisted even when the world lay sleeping beneath the frost. You watch a pair of young boys carry in a bundle of ivy, the leaves trailing behind them like dark ribbons. They clamber up a stool to hang it over the doorway. The vines curl naturally, as though eager to claim the stones. The sight of green against grey warms the room instantly. Curiously, ivy was often linked with Bacchus, the ancient god of wine, and was thought to bring good cheer but also temptation. Medieval priests sometimes complained that too much ivy in the hall encouraged drunkenness, while holly, with its sharp leaves and red berries, was said to represent Christ's crown of thorns and his blood. The balance between the two plants mirrored the balance between piety and pleasure. A maid passes by carrying a branch of mistletoe tied with a ribbon. She hides a smile as she glances up toward one of the doorways. "Careful where you hang that," an older woman warns. "It has caused more trouble than blessing in this hall." They both laugh, and you catch the faint sound of bells from somewhere near the gallery above. Records from the early 15th century reveal that mistletoe was one of the few plants not blessed by the church during Christmas ceremonies. Its roots in older pagan rituals made it suspect, yet people loved it too much to abandon it completely. The compromise was simple: it could decorate the hall, but not the chapel. Faith and habit found a quiet truce in the greenery. The steward walks through the hall, inspecting every detail. He pauses by the dais to adjust the garlands framing the high table, muttering to himself about symmetry. A young servant follows, clutching a bundle of candles, and carefully replaces the melted stubs with fresh ones. The light grows warmer, flickering against the polished wood of the tables. Somewhere near the back of the hall, a carpenter hammers the last of the decorations into place. The sound echoes pleasantly through the room. The high ceiling amplifies everything, even the soft rustle of branches being arranged. For a moment, you can almost forget the cold world outside. In a corner near the fireplace, a servant adds sprigs of holly to the carved mantel. The red berries catch the firelight like jewels. She hums softly while she works, a tune both cheerful and sad, the kind people sing when their hands know the rhythm of labor better than their minds. An interesting note appears in a household guide written by a priest around 1420. He warned that too much decoration could distract the eye from heavenly contemplation, yet the same text gives detailed advice on arranging greenery to please guests. It seems even moral caution had its limits when beauty filled a room. You tilt your head back and look up at the rafters. From the beams hang garlands woven with ribbons, dried oranges, and little cloth charms shaped like birds. The scent is extraordinary, a mix of resin, fruit, and warm dust. You can almost taste it. A group of musicians enters quietly, carrying their instruments. They stop to watch the decorating, smiling at the transformation. One of them plucks a quick, playful tune on his lute, and the sound ripples through the air like laughter. The jester from the roasting yard joins in, clapping to the rhythm, and a few servants begin to hum along. Opinions among scholars differ about whether medieval Christmas decorations had fixed meanings or were simply aesthetic. Some interpret them as remnants of older fertility rites, others as symbolic of divine renewal. Perhaps both ideas coexisted, woven together like ivy and holly in the same garland. The lord and lady appear at the far end of the hall, their footsteps muffled by the rushes. They stop to admire the work. The lady touches a strand of ivy gently, tracing its edge with her gloved hand. Her voice carries softly through the hall. "It feels alive again," she says. Her husband nods, his eyes flicking to the high table where the feast will soon be served. For a moment, everything stands still. The fire crackles, candles flicker, the smell of pine and fruit seems to hold its breath. Then the steward claps his hands sharply, and the spell breaks. The servants scatter to finish their tasks, laughter and footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The transformation is complete. The great hall no longer feels like stone and shadow. It has become a forest of warmth, colour, and promise. Every leaf seems to whisper that winter will end, that life will return. You step aside as a maid sweeps the last of the fallen twigs into a basket. She smiles at you, her cheeks flushed from the firelight. "Now it looks like Christmas," she says simply. The musicians begin to tune their instruments, soft notes fluttering through the air. Somewhere above, a pigeon coos from a rafter, startled by the noise. The castle feels alive, every echo a heartbeat. You look toward the high table, now draped in white linen, where golden plates gleam faintly in the candlelight. Soon it will hold the feast, but for now it waits, perfect and still. The great hall has taken on the glow of celebration. The air is warm with firelight and the scent of greenery. But behind one of the screens, another kind of magic is taking shape. The sound reaches you first, a low, uncertain chord that trembles through the air like the heartbeat of a waking creature. Someone is tuning a lute. You step quietly around the corner and find the musicians gathered in a small alcove lit by a single candle. Their faces are flushed with concentration. A man plucks at a harp string, adjusting the tension with delicate fingers, while a woman beside him tests her voice in a soft hum. Two boys crouch near a drum, tightening its chords, their breath fogging faintly in the chill air. According to records kept by court stewards, musicians in noble households often rehearsed in secret before major feasts. A wrong note during dinner could offend a guest or, worse, ruin the mood of the hall. Their music was not mere entertainment, but a tool of diplomacy, meant to flatter, to soothe, or to remind listeners of the Lord's refinement. You lean against the wall, listening as they practice. The melody they shape is hauntingly beautiful, winding and slow, like smoke rising from a brazier. The sound seems to cling to the stones themselves. The harp's high notes shimmer, the drum thrums softly underneath, and then the voices join clear, calm, and unhurried. Curiously enough, some surviving manuscripts reveal that musicians often borrowed their melodies from old folk songs, polishing them into something fit for noble ears. The same tune that once echoed through a shepherd's field might now accompany a feast beneath vaulted ceilings. In this way, music carried both memory and disguise, bridging worlds that rarely met. The lead musician, a man with a grey beard and kind eyes, lowers his harp and looks around at his small group. "We will begin with the carol of the Nativity," he says. "Then the lay of St. Nicholas, and afterward something light. The guests will be heavy with meat by then. We must lift them up again." The others nod, smiling. A record from a Benedictine abbey mentions that even the most solemn songs of Christmas were sometimes followed by playful tunes about love, chance, or drink. The church frowned on it, but the custom persisted. A good feast needed contrast, holiness and laughter, reverence and release. The woman with the clear voice takes a deep breath and begins a short verse. Her tone is so pure it stills the room. The men exchange looks of quiet pride. When she finishes, the grey-bearded man chuckles softly. "If you sing like that tonight," he says, "even the Lord's creditors will forgive him." They laugh, and the tension breaks. For a moment you see how music here is both art and survival. A misplaced note might draw scorn, but a perfect one can open hearts, smooth grudges, even secure a future. Some scholars note that professional musicians often lived precarious lives, reliant on the favour of their patrons. A generous lord might keep them for years. A stingy one could dismiss them overnight. Yet their art outlasted them, written in ink that carried across generations. The songs that filled halls like this would travel on to courts, villages, and later centuries. You shift slightly, the floor creaking under your boot. The youngest boy glances up, startled. "Just an echo," says the harpist with a wink, covering for your presence. They return to tuning their strings, and the air fills again with the small, sacred noises of preparation. The twist of pegs, the pluck of notes, the soft whisper of fingers brushing over wood. From beyond the screen, faint laughter drifts in. The hall is almost ready. Servants hurry past carrying platters and jugs, and every time the door opens, you catch the scent of roasting meat and spiced wine. The sounds of music mingle with the noise of work, blending into a rhythm that feels older than words. According to a letter written by a minstrel in 1375, the best performances came when no one noticed the shift from silence to song. The music was meant to rise naturally, like dawn breaking across a field. A melody, he wrote, should enter the heart as quietly as sleep. You listen as the group tests that idea. Their next song begins in a whisper, barely more than a breath. It builds slowly, the melody looping around itself, until even the servants nearby pause to listen. The boy with the drum smiles shyly as he taps the beat with his fingertips, and you feel it in your chest, soft but sure, like the rhythm of a calm heartbeat. A lesser-known practice mentioned in a Parisian music treatise suggests that musicians sometimes inserted coded meanings into their songs. A particular interval might signify loyalty, another affection, another faith. The trained ear could catch these hidden messages, though to most listeners they sounded simply beautiful. When the rehearsal ends, the musicians fall silent for a moment, savoring the stillness they've created. Then, as if by instinct, they begin to talk again, low voices, tired laughter, the clink of instruments being packed away. The woman hums a fragment of her song as she gathers her cloak. Outside, a bell rings, summoning everyone to prepare for the arrival of guests. The musicians straighten their shoulders, exchange nods, and slip through the screen into the brightness of the hall. You follow slowly, the melody still echoing in your mind. The great fire burns high, casting long ribbons of light across the walls. The greenery shivers in the rising warmth. In a few moments, the doors will open, and the feast will begin. But for now, there is only this calm before the storm music fading, candles flickering, the quiet heartbeat of a castle about to celebrate. The sound of hoofbeats echoes through the outer gate. You look toward the entrance of the courtyard, where riders approach through the snow, their cloaks billowing like small storms behind them. A thin winter light flashes off polished helmets and the wet hides of their horses. Servants rush forward, boots crunching on the frozen ground, to help them dismount. The visitors have arrived. Inside the great hall, the steward hurries to make sure everything gleams. Candles are replaced, tapestries shaken out, and cups polished to a mirror shine. The musicians take their places discreetly, instruments ready but silent. The scent of spiced wine thickens as servants carry jugs to the sideboards. The castle seems to hold its breath, aware that the day's theatre is about to begin. Records from late medieval estates describe this moment in careful detail. Hospitality was not a matter of kindness, but of reputation. A noble who failed to welcome his guests properly risked humiliation, gossip, or worse, loss of political favour. The entire ritual of arrival was a performance, one measured in gestures rather than words. You stand near the doorway as the first of the guests enter, shaking snow from their cloaks. Their boots stamp rhythmically on the flagstones, scattering flecks of ice. A herald announces names that roll through the air like a list of titles carved in stone. Behind them follow their attendants, laden with gifts wrapped in linen, baskets of pears, bolts of cloth, a falcon with a hood of scarlet leather. One of the visiting ladies lifts her veil, cheeks pink from the cold. She glances around the hall, eyes bright with curiosity. Her gown is trimmed with ermine, and she wears a brooch shaped like a lily. You can tell by her posture that she is used to being watched. According to accounts by chroniclers, noble households often turned these gatherings into silent competitions of wealth. The gleam of metal thread, the number of retainers, even the color of a cloak could be calculated displays of status. Every guest arrived to be both honored and measured. Curiously enough, an old etiquette manual from Burgundy warns hosts not to appear too eager in their welcome, as it suggested weakness. The ideal greeting was graceful but restrained. A bow, a word of blessing, and an invitation to warm by the fire. Anything more risked being seen as desperate. The lord of the castle descends from the dais to meet his guests. His fur-lined cloak sways as he moves, and his smile carries the practiced warmth of diplomacy. He embraces the eldest visitor, clapping him on the shoulder. "You bring the winter sun with you," he says. The other man laughs, his breath misting in the air. Behind them, servants hurry to take cloaks and wipe the snow from boots. Trays of steaming mulled wine appear, the dark liquid swirling with orange and cinnamon. The guests take their cups eagerly, sighing at the first taste. The air fills with the mingled scents of spice and damp wool. Some experts on medieval etiquette note that the first cup of wine offered to guests was more than refreshment. It symbolized safe passage within the Lord's walls. To drink was to accept his protection. Declining the cup, on the other hand, could be seen as an insult, a hint that the drinker doubted the host's sincerity. A servant near you whispers to another, "They say one of the visitors brings news from the coast." The other nods, wide-eyed. Maybe more trade ships have been lost. The storms have been cruel this year. You catch only fragments before they move away, blending back into the flow of movement. The hall grows louder now, the early stiffness fading as laughter ripples through the crowd. The musicians strike a soft chord, just enough to underscore the rhythm of conversation. The glow from the fire deepens, catching on silver cups and golden embroidery. Among the guests, you notice a young man standing apart from the group. He wears no jewels, only a simple wool cloak, though his boots are new and his eyes sharp. A scholar, perhaps, or a clerk in service to one of the visiting lords. He holds a small satchel close to his chest, as if guarding something fragile. For a moment, your eyes meet. He nods politely, then turns away to study the tapestries hanging on the wall. Letters written by travelling clerks often describe the disorientation of entering a new castle during the holidays. Every hall looked similar, yet each had its own smell, its own rhythm. The combination of smoke, perfume, and unfamiliar laughter could be both comforting and alien. The jester slips through the crowd, offering small jokes to ease the formal tension. "Careful, my lady," he says to one guest with mock solemnity. "The mistletoe above your head has a dangerous appetite." She laughs and swats at him with her gloves. His bells jingle as he bows. The hall relaxes around him, the last of the stiffness melting into warmth. An entry from a 15th century steward's ledger notes that laughter was carefully managed in noble feasts. Too much at the wrong time was vulgar, but too little made a host seem joyless. The perfect evening balanced mirth and dignity, like a dance between flame and shadow. As more guests arrive, the space fills with layers of sound hooves in the courtyard, shouts of greeting, the soft thud of snow-laden cloaks being shaken out. The air feels alive, vibrating with expectation. Servants dart through with trays of bread, roasted nuts and cheese to keep hunger at bay until the formal feast begins. You glance toward the high table, where the lord now sits beside his lady. They exchange a brief, knowing smile. The visitors gather below, warming their hands by the hearth, talking in clusters that shift and merge like flickering firelight. Outside, the snow continues to fall, faint and steady, visible through the narrow window slits. Inside, the air glows gold and red. The world beyond these walls might be cold and silent, but here it hums with life. One of the musicians begins to play again, a gentle tune that sounds like laughter turned into sound. The guests pause to listen. The rhythm of the day has changed. The prayers have ended. The gifts have been given. And now the voices of many strangers weave together into one long, warm celebration. The doors at the far end of the hall swing open, and a sudden burst of sound fills the space. Trumpets blare, sharp and triumphant, cutting through the hum of conversation. Every head turns. The smell of roasted meat, smoke, and fruit rushes in from the corridor beyond. Servants appear in a procession, moving with the solemnity of priests. At their head, 4 men carry a great silver platter draped in linen. On it rests the centerpiece of the feast, the roasted boar's head. The sight is extraordinary. Its tusks are polished until they gleam, and its mouth is stuffed with a red apple that glows like fire in the candlelight. Around the platter, sprigs of rosemary and bay leaves form a wreath of green, and a few gilded nuts glint among them like hidden coins. Steam rises faintly from the skin, shimmering as it meets the colder air of the hall. According to descriptions from 15th century feast books, this ceremony was more than a meal. It was a ritual of power and fortune. The boar's head symbolized courage, victory, and abundance. In some places, it was believed to carry away bad luck from the household for the coming year. The larger and more splendid the head, the greater the blessing. The musicians strike up a bold tune, their lutes and pipes twining together with the brassy echo of trumpets. The melody is both stately and joyful. Servants walk in rhythm, eyes fixed forward, careful not to stumble on the rushes underfoot. The jester skips ahead of them, tossing sprigs of ivy into the air and shouting in mock ceremony, "Make way for the champion of the feast!" A ripple of laughter travels through the crowd. Children press closer to see, their faces lit by the glow of fire and curiosity. Even the knights lean forward slightly, pretending indifference while their eyes gleam with admiration. Curiously, one surviving account from a London guild records that, in some households, the boar's head was presented while a song was sung in Latin. The words praised the beast as both enemy and offering, a strange mingling of fear and gratitude. Few understood all the phrases, but the rhythm was infectious, and everyone joined the refrain by the final verse. The servants stop before the high table. The lord rises, his cloak sweeping behind him, and nods for the music to soften. He raises his cup. To the strength of the hunt, the bounty of the season, and the grace of those who labor for both, he declares. His voice fills the hall, steady and commanding. The lady beside him smiles faintly, placing a jeweled hand on the table's edge. Her gaze drifts across the hall, resting on each group of guests in turn. Her presence feels like quiet control, as if she balances the roar of celebration with calm authority. An entry in a steward's record from 1,399 notes that ladies often supervise the presentation of food at feasts, ensuring that display and meaning aligned. Each dish was part of a story: meat for strength, bread for peace, wine for divine joy. To misplace one platter could distort the symbolism of the entire meal. The jester bows dramatically before the high table, pretending to wipe sweat from his brow. "My lord, it was a fierce battle," he says, pointing to the roasted head. "But we prevailed. The beast died honorably, asking only that his apple be red and his gravy thick." Laughter ripples again, easing the formality of the moment. The steward claps his hands sharply, signaling the servants to proceed. The boar's head is set on the dais, and other platters follow in quick succession. Pies shaped like castles, peacocks with restored feathers, trenchers piled high with spiced fruit. The air grows thick with the perfume of roasted sugar, wine, and spice. Some experts on medieval feasts believe that such extravagance served a deliberate purpose. In a world where scarcity was common, abundance became spectacle. To feed guests beyond reason was to show divine favor. The host became almost priestly, offering a temporary vision of paradise through food. You watch the guests as the dishes are placed before them. Their eyes widen with delight and hunger. One man traces a finger over the gold-dusted crust of a pie before daring to cut it open. The scent of meat and herbs bursts forth like trapped sunlight. A peculiar note from a cook's manuscript in York mentions that the pastry shells of some display pies were not meant to be eaten at all. They were hardened to act as serving vessels, shaped and painted like sculptures. Inside, layers of roasted meat and fruit waited to surprise whoever was bold enough to cut them. It was both art and temptation. The music swells again as wine is poured into silver goblets. The hall feels almost alive, pulsing with rhythm and warmth. You can hear laughter, the clink of cups, the hiss of steam as another platter is set down. For a moment it seems that the fire itself keeps time with the music. Somewhere near the back, a young servant crosses himself nervously before carrying a tray of delicate pastries to the Lord's table. They are shaped like stars, their centers filled with almond paste. He moves slowly, almost reverently, knowing that one misstep could ruin the display. A few scholars still debate whether the famous Boar's Head Carol originated in these ceremonies or in later college feasts. The earliest versions date back to the 14th century, but melodies tend to travel, like wine poured from one cup to another. What remains clear is the joy of the moment, the blending of ritual, music, and appetite. The first slice is taken, the crowd cheers, and the feast begins. Servants rush forward with knives and platters, carving and serving in a blur of motion. The air thickens with heat and noise, yet beneath it all runs a quiet harmony, as if centuries of repetition have perfected this dance. You sit back, watching the scene unfold, candles flickering on faces flushed with wine, the glitter of gold on sleeves, the swirl of green garlands against dark stone. The smell of roasted meat and fruit seems to wrap the entire hall in one long, delicious sigh. It is still morning, but time has lost its meaning. The world outside may be frozen and grey, yet inside these walls, everything burns bright. The noise in the great hall grows into a living thing, a tide of voices, clinking cups, laughter, and song. The tables stretch from end to end, covered with white linen, pewter plates, and trenchers of bread that serve as both dish and napkin. Steam rises from platters of meat, while the sweet scent of honey and roasted fruit lingers in the air. The fire roars in the center of the room, throwing sparks toward the rafters where garlands of ivy sway gently in the heat. You find a seat among the lower tables, near the middle of the hall. The servants have begun circulating with pitchers of wine and ale, their movements swift and graceful despite the crowd. The first cup tastes rich and slightly spiced, warm enough to chase the cold from your fingers. The second arrives before the first is half empty. According to household ordinances written for English nobility in the 14th century, feasting followed strict etiquette. Each person had a fixed place according to rank, and each course was served in order, beginning with the lord at the high table. Food travelled downward, both literally and socially. By the time it reached the lower benches, the dishes were cooler and smaller, yet no one complained. To eat at all in the hall of a great lord was an honour. The steward calls out the first course, his voice rising above the noise. Servants approach the dais with practiced steps, setting dishes before the lord and lady. Roast goose, venison in wine sauce, almond pudding, and pies filled with minced meat. The aroma drifts across the room, drawing sighs of approval. A curious note from a French chronicler claims that, in some households, guests were expected to express delight audibly at each course. Silence was considered impolite. The louder the exclamations of admiration, the more the host's generosity was affirmed. The result must have sounded less like polite dining and more like a theatre of gratitude. You glance around at the faces nearby. A knight in worn armor eats quickly, as if still on campaign. Beside him, a merchant's wife smiles shyly at the unfamiliar luxury. Across from you, two servants whisper jokes to each other, careful to keep their laughter soft. The feast gathers everyone into one breathing, noisy organism, bound together by food and warmth. The musicians strike up a tune, lively but not too loud, and the rhythm of conversation begins to match it. The sound of knives on trenchers becomes almost musical. You tear a piece of bread to soak up the juices of roast lamb and notice how the flavors cling to your fingers, heavy with spice and salt. A peculiar custom mentioned in a letter from a courtier suggests that guests often used their bread trenchers to gauge how much they had eaten. The soaked remains at the end of the meal were given to the poor waiting outside the gates, a gesture of charity disguised as practicality. You imagine the cold hands reaching gratefully for what remains of such splendor. One of the servants sets a platter of roasted root vegetables before you, glazed in honey and herbs. The sweetness mingles with the salt of the meat. It is a simple dish, yet it feels luxurious in its abundance. Around you, the hall vibrates with energy. Cups are lifted, hands gesturing, music weaving between conversations like smoke. No two feasts were ever alike. Some lasted hours, others stretched into the night. Chroniclers disagree on how many courses were customary, but all agree on one truth. The feast was less about eating than about belonging. To share the table meant to share the Lord's favor, to exist for a night in a world where hunger and cold were banished. At the high table, the Lord raises his cup, and the noise softens into expectancy. To Christ's birth and the peace of this house, he says. His voice carries easily. The hall answers with a roar of Amen, followed by a crash of cups on tables. The toast ripples outward like a wave, reaching even the farthest corners where the servants stand. You sip your wine again, feeling its warmth bloom through your chest. The taste of cloves lingers on your tongue. The light from the fire glints off the metal cups, turning every droplet into gold. A record from an abbey feast tells of a similar moment when silence fell briefly across the room after a toast, as if everyone, drunk or sober, suddenly remembered why they gathered. Food, after all, was only the surface of something deeper. Behind every bite was gratitude for survival, a prayer that another winter would pass without famine or plague. Across the hall, the jester leaps onto a bench and begins to sing. His voice cuts through the air like a trumpet, high and mischievous. He invents verses as he goes, rhyming noble names with questionable metaphors. The guests laugh until tears run down their faces, and even the steward hides a smile behind his hand. A young serving girl passes behind you, balancing a tray of sweet tarts filled with dried figs. One slips, but she catches it at the last moment, earning a quiet cheer from those nearby. She blushes and hurries on. The scent of sugar and fruit trails in her wake. Some scholars have pointed out that laughter at feasts served a specific purpose. It reinforced unity. To laugh at the same joke, to share the same food, to drink from the same cup, was to acknowledge one's place within the fragile order of the world. Even for a few hours, everyone belonged. The fire pops, sending a burst of sparks into the air. Someone shouts for more wine, and the musicians change tempo, sliding into a quicker, almost dancing rhythm. You tap your fingers lightly against the table, feeling the pulse of the room seep into your bones. A servant refills your cup. "Good wine," you say without thinking. He grins, nodding. "It is," he answers, "but not as good as what the Lord keeps upstairs." His voice carries no resentment, only amusement, the quiet understanding of someone who knows his place, but still finds ways to enjoy it. The night deepens outside, but inside the hall time moves differently. The walls echo with warmth, laughter, and the soft thunder of celebration. For now, you are part of something vast and bright, a single heartbeat in a feast that has lasted for centuries. The first course has ended, and servants rush to clear the tables. The air feels thicker now, warmed by fire, bodies, and wine, yet no one shows any sign of slowing. In the brief pause before the next round of dishes, a different kind of energy fills the hall. The guests begin to talk louder, lean closer, and laugh more freely. It is time for games. The musicians change their rhythm to something playful. Lutes trill, drums thump softly, and a flute breaks into a high, teasing melody. The jester, already flushed from drink, leaps onto a stool near the hearth and calls out, Gentlemen, ladies, and brave eaters of questionable pies, let us test whose wit is sharp enough to cut venison. The crowd answers with cheers and scattered applause. According to descriptions in medieval social chronicles, it was common for games to punctuate feasts between courses. Some were simple riddles or contests of memory, while others were elaborate performances mixing jest, music, and trickery. These diversions served a purpose: to keep conversation lively while the servants prepared the next course, and to display the court's taste for cleverness as much as food. The jester gestures dramatically toward a knight sitting near the middle table. "Tell us, my lord, what creature eats without teeth, sings without a mouth, and sleeps with its eyes open?" The knight frowns, pretending deep thought. "A fish," he declares finally, to scattered laughter. The jester bows. "Correct, my lord. The fish congratulates you from the river, and asks only that you return his cousin from your plate." Curiously enough, some households encouraged these riddles as a way to soften tension between guests of differing rank. A well-timed jest could bridge the gap between noble and merchant, turning awkward silence into laughter. One chronicler even notes that jesters were sometimes coached by the Lord himself, armed with safe jokes that hinted at politics but never wounded pride. Two young women at a nearby table whisper, then rise together. One produces a small carved cup and calls out, "Let us play for the bean!" A murmur ripples through the hall, and the musicians slow their tune. This game, older than memory, decides who among the guests will wear a crown before dessert. Inside one of the sweet cakes waiting in the kitchens hides a single dried bean. Whoever finds it becomes king or queen of the bean for the rest of the evening, commanding harmless mischief. According to written accounts from France and England alike, this custom symbolized the reversal of order, a brief holiday of play when servant might mock master and lady might toast groom. Historians continue to argue whether it began as pagan ritual or Christian parody. Whatever its origin, it thrived in every corner of Europe. The jester announces the rules. "Our queen will be chosen by fate and sugar. Eat carefully, my friends, for choking makes a poor coronation." Laughter ripples again. Servants bring out plates of small honey cakes, each one golden and fragrant. You take one, the crust warm against your fingertips. Around you, the hall falls into a hush of anticipation as everyone begins to eat. Somewhere down the table, someone gasps. A young servant girl lifts her hand, a bean pinched between her fingers. For a heartbeat, no one moves. Then the hall erupts in applause and shouts of laughter. The jester bows deeply before her. "Behold our queen of the bean. Long may she reign, and may her crown fit better than her apron." The girl blushes scarlet, covering her mouth with one hand. The lord of the castle rises and gestures for silence. "Every queen deserves her throne," he says, smiling. Servants scramble to fetch a small wooden chair and carry it forward. The girl is seated upon it, and the jester places a wreath of ivy on her head. The guests cheer again, banging cups on the tables. A curious note from a 15th century chronicler describes how, in some households, the Queen of the Bean could issue mock commands for an hour. The rules were playful but absolute. A knight might be ordered to dance, a priest to sing, or the Lord himself to serve wine. The purpose was simple: to turn hierarchy upside down for a brief, joyous moment before the world returned to order. The jester bows before the new queen. "Your Majesty, what is your will?" he asks. She hesitates, then smiles shyly. "I command," she says, "that every guest must drink a toast to the kitchen, for they have fed us as kings." Cheers fill the hall, and wine flows again. Even the cook, still sweating in the doorway, laughs as she wipes her hands on her apron and raises a cup in reply. The musicians strike a faster rhythm now, a tune fit for dancing. A few guests stand, reluctant at first, then more follow. The benches scrape across the floor, and soon the hall becomes a swirl of colour and motion. Hands clasp, skirts twirl, boots stomp in time. The sound of laughter rises high enough to shake the rafters. Some scholars who study festive traditions claim that these dances were more than amusement. They embodied the season's spirit of renewal, a physical reminder that even in the depths of winter, life moved, bodies warmed, and hearts remained alive. The dance was a prayer made with the body rather than the tongue. As you watch, the Queen of the Bean laughs freely, her earlier shyness forgotten. She waves her hand toward the Lord, who obediently joins the circle of dancers to delighted cheers. The lady of the castle claps to the rhythm, her jewels flashing in the firelight. For a brief time, rank disappears, replaced by laughter and shared warmth. The fire burns high, the musicians play louder, the jester tumbles through the crowd, landing in a graceful bow at the feet of the queen. "Your reign, my lady," he proclaims, "is merrier than any since Noah's dove found land." The hall explodes in applause, the sound rolling through the corridors like thunder softened by joy. And then, as if on cue, the musicians slow their rhythm. The laughter fades to a hum of contentment. The servants begin to clear space again. The next course is ready, but the spirit of the game lingers like perfume in the air. You take another sip of wine, feeling warmth spread through your chest. The fire crackles, the garlands rustle gently in the rising heat, and for a moment the castle feels suspended outside of time, part cathedral, part tavern, wholly alive. The laughter fades into a murmur as the music softens. A few of the dancers, breathless and flushed, settle back to their seats while others still hum fragments of the tune. Servants pour fresh wine into silver cups, and the scent of it mixes with the sweetness of roasted fruit drifting from the kitchen doors. The hall feels like a hearth in human form, glowing and alive. You lean back slightly, letting the warmth settle through your limbs. The flicker of candles catches in the polished goblets and the metal thread of sleeves, turning every small movement into a shimmer. The next course arrives, carried by servants in quick succession. Roasted quails, trout wrapped in herbs, and custard baked in delicate pastry shells. The steam rises like incense, perfumed with cinnamon and orange peel. According to the surviving menus of great houses, the middle courses were the moment of indulgence, when the finest spices and the richest sauces appeared. The early solemnity of prayer and etiquette gave way to laughter, loosened tongues, and small mischiefs. Conversation grew bolder as the goblets emptied faster. The jester reappears, his bells jingling faintly as he lifts a cup to the Queen of the Bean, who still wears her crown of ivy. "Your Majesty," he says grandly, "how fares your kingdom?" She laughs, nearly spilling her drink. The crowd claps, and another round of toasts begins, this time without any prompting. A curious letter written by a traveller in 1410 tells of similar revelry. He describes how a single feast could shift from sacred gratitude to near chaos, as if the spirit of celebration possessed the hall itself. Yet, he adds with amusement, the morning after always returned to order, for even joy must pay rent to discipline. A servant sets a bowl of poached pears before you, glistening with wine syrup. The taste is both sharp and sweet, the fruit soft enough to melt on your tongue. Around you, the noise rises again. A knight begins to sing a ballad, badly off-key but loudly enough to earn laughter and applause. The jester joins him, adding ridiculous verses that turn the story of chivalric love into comic disaster. Somewhere at the back of the hall, a monk in a plain wool robe shakes his head with mock disapproval. Yet when a cup is passed to him, he drinks all the same. His face relaxes into a grin that seems to surprise even himself. It was common, according to monastic records, for invited clergy to attend feasts in noble houses during Christmas. Their presence reminded guests of spiritual order, but their participation in drink and laughter reminded everyone that holiness was still human. Historians remain uncertain how often such visitors truly maintained restraint, judging by the monks' rosy cheeks, perhaps not often enough. A few servants at the far end of the hall begin a small game of dice, half hidden behind a pillar. The soft rattle of bone on wood is barely audible above the music. When one of them wins, he grins so broadly that even the steward cannot pretend not to see. Instead of reprimanding them, the steward simply shakes his head and turns away. Even order has its limits on Christmas night. In a corner near the hearth, a group of women trade stories. One speaks of a goose that escaped the kitchen and took refuge in the chapel, refusing to leave until Mass ended. Another swears she once saw a loaf of bread rise twice its height after being sprinkled with holy water. Their laughter ripples through the air, a gentle counterpoint to the louder voices of the men. According to a small collection of household letters from the 15th century, such storytelling was an expected part of any feast. Nobles valued wit as much as bravery, and a clever anecdote could earn as much admiration as a duel. A lady's tale of kitchen miracles might seem trivial, but in truth, it reminded everyone that life's humour often hid among its labours. The jester hops up on the table again, balancing easily despite the cups and plates. "A toast," he declares, "to all who serve and all who sin, for neither can exist without the other." The crowd roars with approval. A few guests pound the tables in rhythm, and someone begins to clap along with the beat. Servants bring out pitchers of mulled ale, darker and stronger than the earlier wine. The smell fills the hall, earthy and thick, with hints of nutmeg and ginger. You take a sip, and the warmth spreads instantly through your chest. The heat, the sound, and the laughter blur together into something drowsy and dreamlike. Researchers who study medieval feasts still debate whether the alcohol was as potent as modern drinks. Some argue that constant fermentation made it weaker, others that the prolonged boiling of spices concentrated its effect. Whatever the case, the flushed faces and loosened smiles around you tell their own truth. As the night deepens, conversation grows more tangled. Someone challenges the jester to recite Latin prayers backward. He obliges, substituting nonsense words that make even the priest double over laughing. A guard dozes against the wall, his head tipping toward his shoulder. Two dogs curl beneath the table, licking crumbs from the rushes. A lady at the next table leans close to you, her voice low and warm. "They'll still be singing when dawn comes," she says with a smile, "and by then, no one will remember which song began it." She raises her cup in a quiet toast. You nod and return it. The wine glows in the firelight, catching sparks of gold within its red depths. The musicians begin another tune, slower now, almost wistful. It winds through the room like a sigh, softening voices and calming the rhythm of the night. The Queen of the Bean slips off her crown and sets it on the table beside her, watching the dancers with half-closed eyes. The jester bows deeply toward her, his bells whispering faintly, and for the first time this evening, his grin fades into something almost gentle. The hall is quieter now, only the crackle of the fire and the low hum of conversation remain. You take one last sip of ale, tasting spice, smoke, and sweetness, all mixed into one long memory of warmth. Beyond the high windows, snow continues to fall unseen, softening the world outside. The air in the hall is dense with warmth and the faint sweetness of wine-soaked wood. The candles burn lower now, their flames bending slightly in the faint current of air from the open kitchen door. The great feast has reached its middle hours, when laughter turns slower, smiles deepen, and the haze of satisfaction softens the sharpness of formality. At the centre table, the Lord leans back in his chair, watching the guests with quiet amusement. His cup is empty, and he gestures lazily for it to be filled again. The lady beside him whispers something that makes him laugh softly, a sound that carries easily over the hum of the crowd. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, the musicians fall silent. The jester steps forward, his bells barely ringing. It is time for the ritual that everyone has been waiting for, the choosing of the Queen of the Bean's companion, her momentary king. The crowd hushes. The Queen, her ivy crown now slightly wilted, sits tall in her chair. The jester makes an elaborate bow. "My lady," he says, "it is tradition that you name one to share your noble burden. Choose wisely." for he will obey every order you give until the candles burn low. The hall erupts with teasing whispers. Faces turn expectantly. The queen smiles shyly, glancing along the rows of faces. Then, to the delight of the crowd, she points to a middle-aged knight whose armor still glints faintly from earlier duties. He startles, then bows with mock gravity, pretending to adjust an invisible crown upon his head. The hall bursts into cheers. According to descriptions in contemporary diaries, the tradition of the King and Queen of the Bean was both playful and symbolic. For a brief time, social order reversed itself. A servant could rule, a noble could jest, and laughter could hold authority. The reversal reminded everyone that power, like fortune, was fleeting. The jester claps his hands, calling for silence again. "Our queen has chosen well," he proclaims. "A knight who can swing both sword and goblet with equal skill." The knight grins. Mostly the goblet, he admits to laughter and scattered applause. Curiously enough, one chronicler claimed that this custom originated in ancient Roman Saturnalia, a festival when slaves and masters exchanged roles. The church disapproved but eventually adapted it, allowing the game to survive as a harmless echo of older freedoms. Some scholars believe it was this blending of pagan levity and Christian charity that made medieval Christmas so distinctive, both holy and human at once. The queen rises and lifts her cup. "I command," she says with sudden confidence, "that every person here must tell one truth or one lie, and let the hall decide which it is." Cheers erupt again. The jester spins in delight. "A game of the tongue, my lady, more dangerous than swords." One by one, the guests rise. The first, a portly merchant, announces, "I once kissed a queen's hand and fainted before I reached her elbow." Laughter shakes the benches. The next, a lady in blue silk, declares, "I saw the Virgin's face in a pool of wine last year. No one dares to call her a liar." When it is the monk's turn, he rises slowly and says, "I have not prayed since this morning." The jester gasps dramatically and clutches his chest. "Then drink, holy man, and restore your courage." The monk obliges, earning applause. In a quiet corner, two servants trade their own small truths. One admits to hiding extra bread for a hungry child in the village. The other confesses to drinking the Lord's ale when no one watched. They laugh together, but there's tenderness in it, a recognition that confession, in whatever form, carries its own warmth. A record from a 15th century household account mentions that such games of speech served a deeper purpose than amusement. They tested trust within the hall, revealing what could be shared and what must remain secret. Even laughter had its hierarchy, and knowing when to laugh could be as valuable as knowing when to kneel. The queen lifts her hand for quiet. Her voice softens but carries clearly. "I thank you all for your honesty and your foolishness alike, but I think the monk wins tonight, for his truth tastes of courage." She raises her cup toward him, and the hall answers with cheers. The jester, seizing the moment, begins a short verse about truth and ale, the twin saints of Christmas cheer. The melody is simple, the rhythm contagious. Soon the entire hall joins in, the chant rising in waves until even the dogs bark along. Somewhere behind the laughter, a few servants slip through the crowd to refill candles and clear empty platters. The hall breathes as one vast, contented body. The garlands overhead tremble gently from the movement of air, their scent of pine and smoke mingling with the sweetness of the wine. According to later travellers' journals, visitors to such feasts often remarked that joy itself seemed to grow thicker in the air as night deepened, as if the castle's stones absorbed the sound and exhaled it back in kind. There was a kind of sacred exhaustion to it, a peace that only came when laughter had run its full course. The Night King raises his goblet one final time. "My reign ends with this toast," he declares. "May we wake tomorrow with fewer regrets than crumbs." The jester wipes a mock tear from his eye. "A wise ruler indeed," he sighs. "And rare." The crowd erupts in applause. Cups clink together. The queen bows her head slightly, smiling through the haze of candlelight. For one night, She has ruled her tiny kingdom with laughter instead of fear, and the memory will outlast the hangovers to come. You feel your eyes grow heavy, lulled by the rhythm of voices and the glow of the fire. The great hall hums with warmth and music, the kind that vibrates gently against the heart. You lean back against the wooden bench and let the sound wash over you, the taste of spice and sweetness lingering on your tongue. Outside, the snow continues to fall, covering the courtyard in quiet silver. Inside, the world remains awake, caught between holy celebration and human joy. For now, it feels eternal. The jester's song fades into soft applause, and for a few moments, the only sound in the hall is the quiet crackle of the fire. Then the servants begin to move again, gliding through the crowd with fresh platters, ribbons, and small bundles wrapped in cloth. The Lord rises from his seat, his face flushed with warmth and wine, and lifts a hand for silence. "It is time," he says, his voice steady but kind, "for tokens and remembrances." The murmurs hush, and the rustle of fabric and footsteps softens to stillness. This is the part of Christmas night that belongs neither to food nor to prayer, but to affection and promise. According to letters preserved from noble households, the exchange of gifts on Christmas evening was often more intimate than the grand morning ceremony of coins and favours. These were personal tokens, small rings, ribbons, handkerchiefs, even written verses offered not as duty but as gesture. The hall that only hours ago rang with song now fills with quiet conversation, the kind that bends close and lingers. A young knight steps forward, kneels before his lady, and offers a simple brooch carved from bone. She accepts it with a smile that makes him forget the world. In another corner, two servants trade wooden charms they whittled from spare firewood. One is shaped like a dove, the other like a heart. Their laughter is shy, as if they both know it means more than it should. Curiously enough, historians who study domestic life note that such small gifts reveal more about medieval affection than all the ornate chronicles of kings. Grand gestures belong to politics, but these humble exchanges told the truth of feeling. A piece of ribbon could carry more devotion than gold, precisely because it was fragile. You watch as the lady of the castle rises gracefully and moves among her guests. In her hands she carries a small chest lined with blue cloth. From it, she draws folded squares of fine linen embroidered with her own initials. She gives one to each of her attendants, smiling softly as she does. The gesture is simple, yet it radiates dignity. To receive something touched by her hands is both honor and blessing. One of the musicians presents the Lord with a short verse, written in a careful, flowing hand. The words praise generosity, compare the warmth of his hearth to divine light, and close with a promise to serve faithfully until death. The Lord reads it aloud, his voice thick with good humor. "Faithful until death?" he repeats. "Let us hope that is not next week, after another feast like this." Laughter breaks the reverence for a moment, and the hall exhales again. In the far corner, you notice the scholar you saw earlier, the quiet man with the satchel. He sits apart, writing something on a scrap of parchment. When a young servant passes near, he folds the paper neatly and slips it into her hand. She looks startled, then smiles, tucking it carefully into her sleeve. Documents from the period reveal that written tokens, though rare, were prized above all. Few could write fluently, and a message in ink was seen as both secret and eternal. Some even pressed small leaves or dried flowers between the folds, so the scent would linger long after the words had faded. The jester moves through the crowd, offering a different kind of gift. From his belt he draws tiny trinkets carved from bits of bone and metal rings, birds, dice, and gives them out to whoever meets his gaze. "A gift for your luck," he tells one guest. "A charm for your patience," he tells another. To you, he offers a small token shaped like a key. "For secrets you have not yet opened," he whispers, eyes twinkling. No scholar has ever agreed on the origin of this tradition. Some say it came from older winter festivals when small charms were exchanged, to guard against misfortune. Others claim it was purely spontaneous, born from the human impulse to remember one another through objects. Whatever the case, every gift here carries meaning, visible or hidden. A hush settles as the Lord himself produces a bundle wrapped in red cloth. He unwraps it slowly, revealing a gleaming dagger with a hilt inlaid with ivory. Turning to his eldest knight, he says, "For loyalty that never faltered." The hall breaks into applause, and the knight bows deeply, his eyes bright with emotion. A servant passes behind you, offering small honey cakes to accompany the final cups of wine. You take one, the crust warm and sticky beneath your fingers. The sweetness melts on your tongue, carrying faint traces of spice. It feels almost like a farewell to the evening's frenzy. According to contemporary sermons, the giving of gifts at Christmas was meant to echo the Magi's journey to Bethlehem. Yet in practice, it often blurred the line between piety and pleasure. Some priests condemned it as vanity, while others quietly enjoyed the exchange themselves. The tension between holiness and human warmth was never fully resolved, and perhaps that is what made the moment so real. The lady returns to her seat, the last of her linen squares given away. Around her, conversation resumes in soft tones. The glow of the fire paints her face in gentle gold, and for a moment she looks like a figure from a story, both weary and content. A boy near the hearth strums a gentle tune on a lute, humming to himself. The melody is slow and tender, a lullaby to the night. The crowd listens quietly, as if afraid to break the spell. You feel the weight of the day settle in your bones, the cold morning prayers, the roaring fires, the laughter, the feast. All of it flows together in the soft rhythm of that simple song. The jester sits beside the Queen of the Bean, his laughter quieter now. He leans back and sighs. "It will snow harder before dawn," he says, almost to himself. She nods, her fingers tracing the edge of her empty cup. "Then let it snow," she replies, smiling. "We have enough warmth to outlast it." The hall falls into gentle murmurs again, the chaos of earlier hours replaced by calm. The garlands above sway faintly, scattering a few pine needles onto the floor. Somewhere in the darkness outside, the wind begins to rise, pressing softly against the shutters like a lullaby made of air. The hour has turned late, and the last of the dishes have been cleared away. Only the steady glow of the hearth and the faint shimmer of dying candles remain to light the great hall. A hush has settled over the gathering, a peaceful exhaustion that feels deeper than sleep. Some guests sit slumped against the benches, their laughter fading into quiet sighs. Others have slipped away entirely, climbing the stairs to their chambers. The feast has softened into memory. You rise and step toward the door, drawn by the faint clang of metal outside. The air that greets you is sharp and clean, cutting through the haze of warmth. The courtyard lies under a dusting of fresh snow, glowing faintly in the starlight. The night sky is clear, and the moon reflects on the icy stones like spilled milk. A few torches burn along the walls, their flames bending in the wind. Near the outer ramparts, two guards stand stamping their feet, wrapped in thick cloaks. Their breath steams in the cold, and you hear the jingle of keys and armor with every movement. They are part of the midnight watch, the silent guardians of a household at rest. Records from medieval castles show that the watch was not merely for safety, but for ritual. Even on Christmas night, someone had to keep vigil. Thieves might be deterred by the cold, but spirits and ill luck were said to wander freely between midnight and dawn. Keeping the torches lit was as much a prayer as a duty. You walk closer, your boots crunching softly on the snow. The guards notice you, but only nod in greeting. One of them, a tall man with a lined face, warms his hands over a lantern. "Cold enough to freeze the devil's beard," he mutters. His companion chuckles quietly. "Then it's a holy night indeed." Curiously enough, some chronicles suggest that guards often muttered blessings during the watch, half out of faith and half out of habit. Phrases like, "keep the darkness out," or "Saint Michael guard this gate," was spoken into the wind, a way of pushing fear away with words. Few believed completely, but no one dared to stop saying them either. From your vantage point on the steps, you can see the whole courtyard. Snowflakes drift lazily through the air, catching the torchlight. The stables are quiet, the horses dozing in their stalls. Somewhere in the darkness, a dog barks once, then settles again. The only other sound is the low murmur of the guards' conversation. According to castle ordinances written in the 14th century, the midnight patrol followed a strict rhythm. Every hour, the guards changed positions, checking doors, gates, and towers. The ritual gave them both structure and comfort, proof that time still moved even when the rest of the world slept. The older guard takes a sip from a small leather flask and passes it to his companion. The younger man drinks gratefully, wincing at the strength of the contents. "Spiced ale," he explains with a grin. "From the kitchens. A blessing for cold bones." You smell the faint trace of clove and nutmeg as he caps it again. A lesser-known account from a travelling priest mentions that many lords allowed their guards extra wine on Christmas Eve, calling it liquid courage. The priest disapproved but admitted that it seemed to make the castle safer, since no one left their post long enough to freeze. You glance up at the parapets. The stones glisten with a thin layer of frost. A candle burns faintly in one of the upper windows. The lady's solar, perhaps, or a nursemaid's chamber. Beyond it stretches the black horizon of forest and snow, silent and endless. The world feels suspended in that fragile balance between vigilance and peace. The older guard begins to hum, a low, tuneless murmur that sounds almost like a chant. It drifts across the courtyard and fades into the distance. You can almost believe it keeps the night itself at bay. The younger man joins softly, turning it into a faint harmony that seems to blend with the sighing of the wind. Some historians write that guards in the far northern castles sometimes sang during their rounds, not for entertainment but survival. A voice meant warmth, proof that another living soul stood nearby. It was said that if silence fell too long, the cold would creep closer. You turn your face upward and watch the stars. The air smells faintly of pine and smoke, the last traces of the feast still clinging to the breeze. Somewhere behind you, a door creaks open and shuts again as another servant steps outside to dump ashes from the hearth. The sound is small but comforting, another sign that the castle breathes through the night. The older guard finally lowers his hood and looks at you. "The Lord's safe, the fires are steady, and the dogs are quiet," he says. "That's all a man can ask for." He taps his breastplate lightly. "St. George keeps us company." His companion nods solemnly, though his eyes are half closed. In the distance, the faint toll of a bell marks midnight. Its tone is deep and slow, carried by the wind. The guards straighten slightly, out of instinct more than duty. "Another hour blessed," the older one says quietly, "and only the ghosts to worry about now." You smile, though the chill bites at your lips. "Do you believe they walk tonight?" you ask. He shrugs. "Believe? I've seen the world turn stranger than stories. Better to greet the unseen kindly than mock it." A strange stillness follows his words, as if even the wind pauses to listen. The fire in the torches flickers, and the snow falls heavier for a few moments, cloaking everything in silence. Then the older guard turns back to his patrol, footsteps muffled against the soft white ground. You linger a moment longer, breathing in the frozen air. The castle feels vast and fragile at once, a single warm island in an ocean of cold. Every torch, every voice, every heartbeat inside these walls feels precious. When you finally turn back toward the hall, the sound of the guards humming fades behind you. Inside, laughter has quieted to murmurs, and the last of the candles waver in their holders. The warmth rushes back to meet you, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and wax. You slip quietly back into the corridor, closing the heavy door behind you. The warmth of the castle wraps around you again, but the silence feels deeper now. Only the faint crackle of the hearth and the soft hum of distant voices break the stillness. It is the hour when even revelers grow thoughtful, when laughter gives way to quiet wonder. You wander toward the chapel, drawn by a soft glow spilling under its door. The air grows cooler as you near it, touched with the faint scent of pine, candle wax, and smoke. Somewhere ahead, a low voice murmurs Latin, and the echo of it seems to stretch through the stones themselves. Inside, the chapel is dim and beautiful. The candles from the evening mass still burn, their light softer now, almost drowsy. A few servants kneel in the pews, their heads bowed, while the priest stands near the altar, murmuring a final prayer for the night. Beside the small wooden manger, someone has placed a bowl of grain and a cup of water. A curious custom recorded by early chroniclers tells of families placing food and drink in the chapel on Christmas Eve for the animals of the Nativity. It was said that at the stroke of midnight, all beasts bowed their heads and found their voices to praise the Christ child. Though most dismissed it as superstition, few dared to mock it. The hope that animals might share in holiness brought comfort to a weary world. You step closer to the chapel door and glance outside again. The courtyard glimmers under the moonlight, calm and still. The priest finishes his prayer, extinguishes one candle, and leaves the others to burn low. He bows once toward the altar, then slips quietly past you without a word, his robe whispering across the floor. You remain, drawn by the gentle stillness. The carved ox and donkey beside the manger seem to watch you with patient eyes. You recall the old legend, repeated in countless sermons, that at midnight on Christmas, every animal in the world kneels in prayer. Children were said to sneak from their beds to witness it, only to fall asleep before the miracle could be seen. According to notes from a 14th century preacher, belief in the kneeling beasts spread widely across Europe. Some saw it as harmless wonder, others as dangerous superstition. A few scholars later proposed that the story began as a metaphor for humility, but like all good tales, it outgrew its origin. You find yourself smiling, half in faith and half in doubt. The air feels strangely expectant, as though the castle itself listens. A faint creak comes from outside, followed by a soft whicker of horses in the stables. You imagine them shifting in their stalls, their heads bowing slightly under the low rafters. Perhaps it is only the cold. Perhaps it is something more. The snow outside glows faintly blue under the moon. The silence has a weight to it, the kind of stillness that feels alive. You rest your hand on the wooden doorframe and close your eyes. The smell of wax and pine fills your lungs, grounding you in this quiet hour suspended between belief and dream. A fragment of a medieval poem comes to mind, one you once heard a monk recite: "The beasts shall bend, the stars shall sing, and man shall sleep while angels wing." No one remembers who wrote it, but it lingers in many manuscripts, passed from abbey to abbey. Some historians argue that such verses reveal how the medieval world blurred lines between the sacred and the ordinary. Faith was not a distant idea, but something that breathed through wood, smoke, wind, and candlelight. A faint movement catches your eye near the manger. A mouse scurries across the floor, pauses and sniffs at the bowl of grain before vanishing again into the shadows. You cannot help but laugh softly to yourself. Perhaps the legend holds its truth in smaller forms. The chapel feels warmer now, as if your laughter has woken it. The flicker of the candles paints the carved figures in gold and shadow. Mary's face seems to glow with quiet serenity, while the carved child in her arms lies wrapped in linen that gleams faintly in the soft light. You sit on one of the wooden benches, the chill of the seat pressing through your clothes. Your thoughts drift with the smoke curling toward the ceiling. The feast, the songs, the games, they feel far away now, replaced by a deeper calm, the kind that settles when noise and joy have run their course, leaving only peace behind. According to a surviving note from a chaplain in York, many lords insisted on ending the Christmas feast with a quiet prayer or vigil, to remind the household that joy and devotion must share the same breath. The feast and the Mass were not opposites but partners in a rhythm as old as the season itself. You watch the final candle burn lower, its wax pooling on the altar. The air feels heavy with drowsy holiness. Somewhere outside, an owl hoots once, soft and low, before silence returns. When you finally stand, your knees protest faintly. You bow toward the altar out of instinct more than belief, and whisper a small wish of your own, that the warmth of this night might linger through the winter to come. As you step back into the corridor, the cold air greets you again, sharper but not unfriendly. The distant sound of a door closing echoes through the castle. The world feels suspended between waking and sleep, holy and human, real and imagined. You glance once more toward the courtyard, where faint hoofprints mark the snow. The horses stand still, their heads lowered. For a brief moment, you think they might indeed be praying. Then the wind stirs, and you are left alone in the quiet, smiling to yourself. You walk slowly back toward the great hall, the sound of your footsteps muffled by rushes and the fading echo of your thoughts. The warmth returns by degrees, first as a whisper of heat against your face, then as the soft crackle of fire and the low murmur of voices that still linger there. A handful of people remain awake, gathered close to the hearth where the last of the wine glows ruby in the firelight. The hall looks softer now. The candles have burned low, and shadows stretch like gentle waves along the walls. Garlands droop slightly, their berries dim under the pale glow. A few servants sweep the floor quietly, collecting fallen crumbs and bones from the feast. The air smells of wood, smoke, tallow, and sweet decay, the fading perfume of celebration. Near the fire, the jester sits cross-legged, his hat beside him, his bells silent. He speaks in a quiet voice, his usual mischief replaced by calm. The remaining guests listen, some smiling faintly, others lost in thought. He is telling a story. According to an old tradition described in household accounts, the final hour of a Christmas feast often ended with tales shared by the fire. Each household had its own storyteller, sometimes a bard or minstrel, sometimes the jester himself. The stories were chosen to soothe rather than excite, to bring the revelers gently back towards silence. You take a place near the edge of the circle. The jester's voice has softened into a rhythm that almost feels like the sway of sleep. There was once, he says, a farmer who found a silver coin in the snow. He thanked heaven for it and gave it to a stranger who asked for bread. The next morning, his barn was full, though no one saw who brought the grain. And every year after, on this night, he left his door open and his fire burning, in case the stranger returned. The listeners nod. The tale is simple, familiar, yet in this moment it feels sacred, as if truth hides in its plainness. The fire pops softly, sending tiny sparks drifting upward. Curiously enough, chronicles from medieval abbeys mention that stories like this served as gentle moral lessons wrapped in warmth and familiarity. They reminded people that generosity and faith were not separate virtues, but the same act seen from different angles. The audience listened not to learn, but to remember what they already knew. When the jester finishes, a silence follows, not empty, but full of quiet thought. Then an older man by the fire clears his throat and begins another tale. His voice is rough, but steady. There was a knight, he says, who swore to guard a chapel through the night each Christmas. He feared neither beast nor man, but when the candles burned out, he heard a child weeping. He followed the sound and found only his own reflection in a pool of melted wax. And he understood, too late, that he had been guarding his own heart all along. The room stays still. The monk from earlier crosses himself gently. The lady at the far table closes her eyes. The jester smiles faintly, nodding. A fine tale, he murmurs, perhaps even true. According to a small parchment found among the writings of a travelling friar, such stories were shared long after the feasts had ended, passed from castle to village and back again. Each retelling changed the details, yet the essence remained. They were the collective dream of a world that refused to let its faith freeze entirely in winter. The fire shifts, logs collapsing softly into embers. The red glow paints everyone's faces in gentle light. The jester stretches his legs, then gestures toward you. "You've been quiet," he says. "Every listener carries a story. What's yours?" You shake your head, smiling. But he insists. "Then tell us a memory. Even silence hides something worth hearing." You think for a moment, staring into the fire. The flames move like the dance of thought itself, bright and fleeting. Finally, you say softly, "Once, I watched a winter sunrise alone. The world looked so empty that it frightened me. But then I saw smoke from a chimney far away, and I realized someone else was awake, someone tending their fire, and it was enough." The hall remains quiet for a few breaths, the air thick with the simplicity of your words. Then the jester nods. "A good story," he says, "the kind that keeps the cold out." The monk smiles, murmuring something about how warmth shared is warmth multiplied. A few guests raise their cups in quiet approval before draining the last of their wine. Historians studying the customs of medieval households have suggested that this final hour of shared storytelling may have been one of the most intimate communal moments of the year. For a time, the boundaries of class and birth blurred, voices mingled, laughter softened into understanding. It was not about entertainment, but connection. A servant adds a fresh log to the fire, and for a moment the flames flare bright again, throwing long shadows that dance across the garlands. The air smells of pine and smoke. The warmth presses against your face, gentle and alive. The lady of the castle rises, her gown whispering softly. "It grows late," she says, her voice calm but firm. "Let us end the night with peace as we began it." She gestures for the last candles to be snuffed. One by one, the lights go out, leaving only the great fire glowing at the heart of the hall. The jester bows deeply to her, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Peace, my lady," he says softly, "and a dream worth waking from." The lady smiles faintly and nods. "Peace?" she repeats. Then she turns toward the stairs, her attendants following like shadows. The jester sits again, leaning close to the fire. You stay a moment longer, watching the coals dim. The sound of the flames feels like breathing, slow and steady. You can sense sleep pressing gently at the edges of your thoughts. Outside, the wind has quieted. Inside, the fire burns low, steady as a heartbeat. The night of feasting and laughter has become something softer, a long sigh shared by every soul within these walls. You leave the warmth of the hall and step into the corridor again, where the air feels cooler and quieter. The laughter and music fade behind you until they become only a hum in the distance, like the last vibration of a string after it is plucked. The torches along the wall burn low, casting halos of gold that tremble against the stone. You feel the stillness that comes only after long celebration, when even joy must rest. Curiosity guides your steps toward the outer courtyard. The heavy wooden door creaks open, and the cold night air folds around you like a cloak. Snow has fallen again, fine and dry, dusting the cobblestones with silver. The world glitters faintly beneath the moonlight. The sound of the wind is gentle, brushing softly against the walls of the keep. You wander slowly along the edge of the bailey. The footprints from the guards' patrols have already filled with snow, erased almost as soon as they were made. It is quiet now, so quiet that your own breath sounds loud in your ears. The castle feels like it is dreaming, every tower and parapet sleeping under a thin blanket of frost. You pause near the stable, where the faint scent of hay and warm animal breath mingles with the cold. Inside, the horses shift lazily, hooves clinking against the straw-covered floor. One of them snorts softly, steam curling from its nostrils like smoke from a tiny forge. You reach out a hand and brush its muzzle, feeling the contrast of warm skin against frozen air. The creature's eyes are calm, reflecting the faint firelight from a distant torch. A record written by a traveling merchant describes moments like this with quiet wonder. He wrote that after every great feast there came a spell of stillness, when the castle's noise sank into its stones and the night held its breath. Historians now think he exaggerated, but reading his words, you can almost feel how the silence itself became sacred, a kind of pause between the human and the eternal. You continue your slow walk, boots crunching through snow that sparkles like powdered glass. Overhead, the stars hang bright and unmoving, so clear they seem close enough to touch. Somewhere to the east, the faint outline of a forest lies in shadow, black against the white ground. Beyond that is the village, invisible now, sleeping under its own layer of frost. Near the corner of the courtyard, you notice a figure sitting on a low wall by the well. It is one of the kitchen servants, a young man with a rough wool cloak drawn tightly around his shoulders. He holds a candle in a small lantern, its light flickering weakly against the dark. He looks up as you approach and gives a shy nod. "Can't sleep?" you ask. He smiles faintly. "Too much noise inside, too much quiet out here. I like the middle of both." He gestures to the lantern. "Sometimes I sit here after the feast and watch the flame until it stops shaking, makes the world feel still again." Curiously enough, an old superstition recorded in a Welsh chronicle said that watching a single flame without blinking on Christmas night could reveal visions of the year to come. The flicker of the candle was thought to mirror fate itself, steady for good fortune, wavering for hardship. The young man's candle trembles gently, but never goes out. You both sit in silence for a while. The snow drifts lightly, settling on the edge of the well, the tops of your boots, the servant's cloak. The air is cold enough to sting your nose, but the peace of the moment feels warmer than any fire. Somewhere in the tower above, a faint sound of harp strings drifts through the night. Someone, perhaps one of the minstrels unable to sleep, plays alone in the dark. The notes fall slowly, like drops of water in a deep cave. The melody carries over the courtyard, delicate and lonely, and fades into the wind. A few scholars of medieval music have remarked that these private songs, often played long after the official performances ended, were as close to personal prayer as many minstrels came. They were never recorded, never heard by audiences, but existed for the comfort of the one who played them. The sound you hear now feels like that, a quiet confession made only to the stars. The servant sighs softly beside you. "Tomorrow it will start again," he says. "The cleaning, the sweeping, the mending. But tonight feels like the world has stopped." You nod. "Maybe that's the gift of Christmas," you say quietly. "Not the food or the laughter, but this moment after, when everything rests." He smiles again, his eyes reflecting the candlelight. "A good gift," he says, "one that costs nothing." The wind shifts, carrying the faint smell of the feast's remains, smoke, spice, and roasted meat cooling in the kitchens. The sounds of the castle have dwindled to almost nothing. Somewhere deep within, a door creaks shut, and from the stables comes the soft sigh of a sleeping horse. According to the diary of a monk who once spent Christmas as a guest in a great castle, this was his favourite hour of all. He wrote, "When the revels end and the laughter fades, one hears the heart of the place beating quietly. It is in that heartbeat that God hides." You stand at last, brushing snow from your cloak. The young servant extinguishes his candle and tucks the lantern under his arm. Together you walk back toward the hall, your steps slow and steady, the snow crunching softly beneath your boots. At the door you part ways. He bows slightly and disappears toward the servants' quarters, while you pause to look back one last time. The courtyard glows faintly in the moonlight, the snow falling gently, endlessly. The world feels still enough to hold its breath. You close the door behind you. The silence of the night follows, settling around you like a final blessing. The castle sleeps above you now. The feast has ended, the fires are dim, and the corridors are quiet except for the soft, rhythmic whisper of wind pressing against the shutters. Yet somewhere below, life still stirs. From the staircase near the kitchen, you hear laughter and the clink of clay cups. The servants are celebrating their own Christmas at last. You follow the sound down into the warmth. The air grows thick again with smoke, spice, and human closeness. When you reach the lower hall, you see them gathered around the great kitchen hearth. The fire that once roasted the boar now burns lower but steady, its glow painting faces in gold and red. The smell of ale and toasted bread fills the air, and the mood is different from the Lord's feast above, looser, freer, real, in a way that the grand dining hall could never be. According to accounts found in 15th century manorial ledgers, the servants' feast usually began after the nobles had finished theirs. It was both reward and relief, the one night when ranks below stairs could bend without fear. Food that remained from the main tables was divided and shared, though the portions were smaller and the flavors milder. Still, the spirit of celebration was the same, and perhaps even warmer. A maid sits near the fire, holding a wooden bowl of stew. "Not as fancy as the Lord's dishes," she says, smiling, "but it fills better." Beside her, the cook raises her cup. "And no one tells us how to sit or speak," she adds to a chorus of laughter. Someone begins to hum an old tune, older than any carol sung upstairs, and within seconds others join in. Curiously enough, in several recorded letters from castle stewards, there are notes of mild frustration about these late-night gatherings. Servants were known to sing until dawn, even dancing in the kitchens, despite the cold stone floors. Yet few lords ever punished them for it. As one steward wrote, "Better a merry household than a sullen one." You take a seat near the hearth. The heat feels softer here, less like ceremony, more like home. A pot of ale warms beside the coals, sending up the comforting scent of honey and grain. A young boy offers you a cup. The drink is rough but sweet, and it burns pleasantly down your throat. In the corner, a group of men play a game of knucklebones, their laughter punctuated by shouts of victory and mock protest. The jester from the hall has joined them, hat discarded, sleeves rolled up, his usual performance replaced by simple ease. "The Queen of the Bean gave me leave to lose gracefully," he says, tossing the bones with exaggerated solemnity. The others jeer when he wins anyway. Historians who study everyday life note that such moments blurred the boundaries between roles. For a few hours, the cook could outtalk the steward, the stable boy could tease the jester, and the washerwomen could sing bawdy verses without fear. The night after the feast was the castle's equalizer, a fleeting democracy of laughter and fatigue. You watch as one of the older servants carves the leftover bread into thin slices and passes them around. The loaf is hard, but no one complains. A maid dips hers in ale to soften it, then says with mock formality, "To the year ahead, less snow, fewer fleas, and no broken dishes." Everyone cheers and drinks to that. A lesser-known folk belief recorded by chroniclers claims that if the servants' feast passed in good cheer, the household would prosper through the coming year. Quarrels on this night, by contrast, were thought to bring misfortune. Perhaps for that reason, every jest tonight ends in laughter, even those aimed at the steward's endless complaints or the cook's temper. Someone begins a song, rough but melodic. The words tell of a shepherd who fell asleep and dreamed that stars were candles lit by angels. The melody twists gently through the air, simple and haunting. You can almost feel the centuries folding into it, the way such songs carry memory from one generation to the next. No written music survives for most of these peasant carols, yet fragments appear in marginal notes and diaries. Scholars believe they were passed orally for hundreds of years, changing with each singer's voice. What mattered was not perfection but participation. To sing together was to remember that joy belonged to everyone. The fire crackles, throwing sparks up the chimney. The cook leans back on her stool, eyes half closed, and says softly, "Tomorrow we will clean the hall, scrape the grease from the tables, and carry out barrels heavier than sin. But tonight, we are kings." Her words hang in the air like a benediction. The jester raises his cup toward her. "To kings without crowns," he declares, "may our reign last until the ashes cool." The crowd answers with applause, then laughter, and another round of ale follows. Outside, the wind howls faintly through the shutters, but inside, the warmth grows thick and steady. A boy curls up beside the hearth, already asleep, his head resting on a folded apron. The others lower their voices, letting the flames speak for them. The crack and hiss of burning wood become the rhythm of their quiet satisfaction. According to one anonymous household diary, servants sometimes ended their feast by sharing wishes rather than prayers. Each would name something hoped for in the year ahead: a good harvest, safe births, fewer taxes, more laughter. There was a kind of faith in speaking the wish aloud, even if no saint was listening. A maid murmurs, "May the cook stop scolding us." The cook answers, "May the maid stop burning bread." They laugh softly, clinking their cups together. You feel drowsy from the heat and the soft rumble of voices. The flames dance before your eyes, painting the ceiling with gold. For a moment, the castle above and this kitchen below seem part of the same heartbeat, one steady pulse of warmth against the cold world outside. The last of the ale is poured. The fire begins to sink lower. One by one, the servants drift away to their corners, some curling up on benches, others disappearing through side doors to the narrow sleeping rooms beyond. The jester stays until the last ember glows, humming faintly to himself. Then he stirs the ashes with a poker and whispers, "Sleep well, old fire, you've earned it." The smoke rises gently, carrying the scent of pine and warmth. The castle, for the first time in a long day, is finally still. By the time you climb back up the narrow stairs, dawn still feels far away. The castle lies in near silence, its halls cooled by the night air that slips in through cracks around the windows. Only a few embers glow faintly in the great hearths, small reminders of the fires that had roared there only hours before. You pull your cloak tighter, shivering as you step into the long corridor that leads toward the solar. From somewhere nearby comes the faint rattle of glass and the murmur of a voice. You follow it to a small chamber near the infirmary, where the castle's physician has set up his table for the season. Inside, the light of a single lamp flickers over jars, bowls, and small bundles of herbs hanging from the ceiling. The smell is sharp and strange vinegar, honey, dried rosemary, and smoke. The physician looks up from his work, his thin hands busy grinding something in a mortar. "You're late to the apothecary," he says with a half smile, "or early depending on the illness." You laugh softly, the sound breaking the hush. "Neither, I hope. I was only walking." He nods toward a bench. "Then sit. The castle sleeps, but I do not. Someone must tend the remedies for what last night's joy will bring by morning." He gestures toward a row of glass flasks. Too much wine, too little sense. According to a small collection of medical treatises preserved from the 15th century, physicians in noble households prepared special mixtures during the 12 days of Christmas: spiced wines for digestion, honey syrups for coughs, and strange concoctions meant to protect against melancholy after too much merriment. The season was not without danger. Sudden cold and indulgence could turn celebration into sickness overnight. The physician pours a dark red liquid into a small ceramic cup. "This," he says, "is wine boiled with sage and cloves. It settles the stomach and clears the head. A wise man drinks it before sleep, a fool after." He takes a sip himself, grimaces, and then smiles faintly. "Tonight, I am both." A lesser-known passage from a medieval herbal manual mentions that cloves and sage were believed not only to heal, but also to drive away evil spirits that clung to rooms after heavy feasting. Whether or not the science was sound, the scent of spice and heat gives the chamber an air of calm. You glance around. The shelves are lined with jars labelled in Latin and in the physician's uneven handwriting: Mel rosatum, salvia officinalis, oleum rutae. Beside them sit more ordinary things: a cup chipped at the rim, a bundle of mint tied with string, a half-eaten loaf of bread. The mix of care and chaos feels entirely human. The physician reaches for a dried bundle of leaves and begins to crumble it into a bowl. "People forget," he says quietly, "that winter sickness kills more than war. A cough can take a strong man faster than a blade." He pauses and adds, almost to himself, But laughter heals too. Last night, I heard enough laughter to keep this house alive until spring. Curiously, some monastic healers recorded that they prescribed mirth as medicine, urging their patients to attend festivals or listen to minstrels. It was said that joy strengthened the heart and eased the breath. Modern scholars often smile at the idea, but sitting here, you understand the wisdom behind it. The physician finishes his mixture and begins to fill a row of small bottles for the Lord, the lady, and any poor soul who wakes with his head full of regrets. He stops, then pours a little into a separate cup and hands it to you. For the road back to bed, he says. The drink burns slightly on your tongue, leaving behind a warmth that spreads through your chest. It tastes of herbs and faint sweetness, like fire wrapped in honey. You feel your limbs relax, the tension from the cold seeping away. He chuckles at your expression. It works quickly. The trick is not to drink enough to forget the cure. Some household records reveal that physicians often doubled as philosophers during long winter nights. They would stay awake by candlelight, writing small reflections about time, health, and the soul. One such note, found in the margins of an old medical book, reads, "The body is the first house built by God, but the mind is the one that must be kept warm." You suspect this man might have written something similar if he had parchment to spare. He turns back to his work, grinding more herbs. "Tomorrow I'll have to tend to the steward's digestion, the cook's temper, and the Lord's conscience," he says wryly. That last one is always the hardest to heal. You rise to leave, thanking him for the warmth and the drink. "Sleep if you can," you tell him. He laughs quietly, shaking his head. "I'll sleep when the candles stop melting." The corridor outside feels colder after the closeness of the chamber. You walk slowly, the taste of spice still lingering on your tongue. The castle is utterly silent now. Even the dogs have stopped stirring. Through the narrow windows, you see the faintest blush of light at the horizon, a sign that dawn is thinking of returning. You stop near one of the torches and hold your hands to the small flame. The warmth barely reaches your skin, yet it feels alive enough to promise that the long night will soon give way. The feast has ended, but the life within these walls continues in its quiet rituals. A physician's brew, a servant's song, a flickering flame kept alive against the cold. You breathe deeply, the air sharp with winter, and feel an odd peace settle over you. The night, like the wine, has burned through its excess, leaving only stillness and gentle heat behind. The faintest grey of dawn begins to show along the eastern horizon. It leaks through the narrow windows of the upper corridors, soft and hesitant, turning the air from black to blue. The candles are nearly gone now, their wicks curled like small black threads in pools of wax. The castle breathes again, shifting from sleep into the first quiet stirrings of another day. You follow the faint hum of sound that begins to rise from the kitchens below. It is the unmistakable rhythm of morning, the scrape of metal on wood, the shuffle of feet, the gentle rush of breath as someone stirs a hearth back to life. When you step through the archway into the kitchen, you are greeted by the sight of embers glowing deep red, like the last heartbeat of the night. The cook is already awake, wrapped in a heavy shawl, her hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck. She is kneeling before the fire, coaxing it with handfuls of straw. "You see," she says to the small boy beside her, "even fire needs kindness before it remembers how to burn." He nods solemnly and blows gently until the flames catch. According to detailed accounts from manorial records, kitchens in great households stirred back to life long before the rest of the castle woke. The first task was always the fire, since nothing else could begin without it. Water froze in buckets, bread stiffened in the chill, and even the dogs sought the warmth of the coals before venturing out. The cook stands, dusting her hands, and looks around the room with satisfaction. "We survived another feast," she says, half to herself, "and the roof's still standing." She glances toward you. "Did the Lord enjoy the boar's head?" "He did," you reply, "and the rest of us with him." She smiles faintly. "Good. Then it was worth the burns." She holds up her forearm, where a faint pink line gleams in the firelight. Every Christmas leaves a mark. Curiously enough, a collection of letters written by medieval kitchen staff mentions that cooks often viewed their scars with pride, calling them the price of plenty. To feed an entire household through the cold months was no small triumph. Each burn or blister was a reminder that the warmth had been kept alive. The boy tugs on her sleeve. "What will we make today?" he asks. "Broth for the weak and bread for the hungry," she replies. "There's always work after joy." She points to a pile of bones and scraps from the feast. "See there? That's where tomorrow's meal begins." She turns back to the fire, her movements calm and steady. The boy follows, his small hands mimicking hers. Together they fill the air with the soft music of labor, the clatter of ladles, the crackle of kindling, the low hum of flame. In a corner of the kitchen, an older woman kneads dough, her fingers working rhythmically. Each movement presses soundlessly into the stillness, the kind of motion that carries memory. You realize that this morning ritual has likely been repeated every year for generations, the same rhythm of breath and hand, of fire and flour. According to a note in a 14th century household guide, bread baked on Christmas morning was often marked with a cross and shared with servants before the first meal of the day. The gesture was simple, a blessing disguised as breakfast. The cook reaches for a wooden spoon and tastes the broth simmering over the small fire. "Too bland," she mutters, adding a pinch of salt. Last night's laughter must have stolen the flavor. The boy laughs and she ruffles his hair affectionately. "Then we shall season it with patience," she says. Her words linger in the air longer than the steam from the pot. A few servants begin to drift in, rubbing sleep from their eyes, grateful for the warmth. One of them carries a small jug of ale, still chilled from the night. Another brings fresh milk from the barn, its surface faintly steaming in the cold. Together they move with the slow precision of people who have worked beside each other too long to need instruction. Some historians note that the rhythm of a medieval kitchen was closer to music than to industry. Each sound fit into the next: the chop of wood, the ring of iron, the hiss of steam. The result was a living harmony, one that nourished not only the body but the sense of belonging itself. The cook begins to hum softly, the same tune you heard her singing the day before when she was basting the meat. The melody circles through the room, warm and unhurried. The boy hums along under his breath. For a moment, it feels as if the song itself keeps the fire alive. You take a seat on a small stool near the doorway. The heat of the hearth seeps into your legs, and the smell of the broth grows richer. The world outside remains frozen, but here, the day begins again with quiet certainty. "Soon they'll wake upstairs," the cook says, glancing toward the ceiling. "The steward will want warm wine for his headache, and the lady will ask for sweet bread, but we'll have a moment before the noise begins." She pours you a small cup of the steaming broth and hands it over. The taste is earthy, simple, and deeply comforting. It carries traces of herbs, fat, and smoke, the flavors of 100 meals layered into one. You swallow, and feel the warmth spread slowly through your chest. According to fragments from the notebooks of a traveling physician, nourishment in winter was considered a form of prayer. To share food, even a sip of broth, was to honor the quiet miracle of survival. The cook wipes her hands on her apron and sits beside you for a moment. "Every year," she says softly, "I think the fire will not last. But it always does. Even when the wood is wet and the air is cruel, it burns." You nod, looking at the red glow of the coals. "Maybe that's what Christmas is," you say. "A fire that remembers how to burn." She smiles, tired but content, and tosses another small log into the hearth. The flames rise instantly, crackling brighter. Outside, the first faint birdsong breaks the silence of dawn. By the time the sun finally lifts above the frozen horizon, the castle is stirring again. Pale light filters through narrow windows, touching the rush-covered floors with thin streaks of gold. The air smells of smoke, bread, and something softer, like dust warmed by morning. A bell rings once from the chapel tower, slow and resonant, calling the household to prayer. You follow the sound through the corridor, where servants and guests move quietly, their laughter from the night before replaced by calm murmurs and soft yawns. The feast has passed, but its warmth still lingers in the faces of those you pass. You step into the chapel just as the second bell begins. The space feels different in daylight. The flickering candles from the night before have burned down to stubs, replaced now by a faint blue glow from the high windows. Frost clings to the glass, turning the light into 1,000 tiny shards. The air smells of wax and pine, with a faint trace of incense from the evening mass. According to notes in a 15th century prayer book, many castles held a second, quieter service on Christmas morning, attended by servants, travellers, and those too weary to stay awake for the midnight celebration. The tone was gentler, more intimate, less about ceremony and more about reflection. The priest stands before the small altar, his voice calm and low. He speaks in Latin, but the rhythm carries its own music, familiar even to those who do not understand the words. Around you, heads bow, and the only sound apart from his voice is the faint creak of wood beneath knees. You kneel too, the cold of the stone floor seeping through your cloak. Your mind drifts as the prayer unfolds, tracing memories of the night before. Laughter, music, the glow of fire, the scent of roasting meat, the soft murmur of stories by candlelight. Each image feels distant yet alive, as though floating just behind your eyelids. Curiously, a scholar of medieval spirituality once wrote that faith in those times was not so much a matter of belief as of rhythm. It was a dance between labor and rest, feast and prayer, body and spirit. No one stayed in one state for long. Each moment prepared the way for its opposite. The joy of the hall needed the quiet of the chapel to complete it. The priest raises his hands. His voice strengthens as he recites the familiar blessing. Pax sit in domo ista, he says. Peace be upon this house. The congregation answers with a soft murmur that feels less like speech and more like breathing. The words ripple through the chapel like the tide drawing back to sea. When the service ends, no one rushes to leave. Some linger in silence. Others whisper greetings to one another. The cook you met earlier sits in the back row, her hands folded, her eyes closed in simple stillness. Even the jester, hair tousled and hat forgotten, bows his head for a moment before slipping quietly out. You remain seated, watching the faint beams of sunlight shift slowly across the altar. Dust dances within them, turning like tiny golden spirits. For a long moment, the stillness feels like a living thing, fragile and whole. A line from an old homily comes to mind, written by a monk who loved winter more than any other season. When the fields sleep, the soul awakes. When the fires fade, the heart learns its own warmth. You wonder if he ever stood in a chapel like this, feeling the same mix of fatigue and peace that fills you now. The priest approaches, smiling faintly. You look as though you've stayed up through all the bells, he says kindly. Perhaps I have, you reply. He nods, amused. Then rest. The body honors the spirit best when it sleeps. The Lord will still be here when you wake. You thank him and step outside. The light has grown brighter, the cold sharper but cleaner. Snow glitters on the rooftops, and icicles hang like glass teeth from the eaves. The courtyard below hums with slow activity. Servants hauling water, dogs trotting along the walls, a stable hand brushing snow from a horse's mane. The castle that only hours ago was filled with laughter and song now moves to a gentler rhythm, a quiet afterglow of celebration. Some chroniclers describe this morning calm as the truest reflection of Christmas. Not the feast or the gifts, but the soft return to ordinary life, where the sacred hides in daily tasks. To wake after joy and still find gratitude in the smallness of the world was, in its own way, a miracle. A maid passes by carrying a loaf of warm bread, and the smell stops you in your tracks. She laughs when she sees your expression. You'd think you hadn't eaten in days, she teases. You smile back, breathing in the scent. It smells like sunlight, you say, and she grins, hurrying away toward the kitchen. You walk along the inner wall of the courtyard, the snow crunching beneath your boots. The sun sits low but bright, painting everything in soft gold. Smoke curls from the chimneys, mingling with the white breath of morning. The cold pinches your cheeks, but the light feels gentle, almost kind. A few children, the servants' sons and daughters, chase each other near the gate. Their laughter rings clear against the stone. One of them stops to wave at you, her mittened hand red with cold. You wave back, and she giggles before running off again, leaving a trail of small footprints in the snow. According to a record kept by a northern manor, children were often given the morning of Christmas to play before chores began again. It was believed that their laughter helped to bless the grounds, chasing away the heaviness of winter. The adults might not have believed it fully, but they smiled all the same. The bell in the chapel rings again, marking the passing of another hour. The day stretches ahead, quiet and clear. The feast is over, but its echo remains in every sound, every face, every spark of life that moves through the cold air. You take one last look at the courtyard before turning toward the keep. The fire will be waiting, and perhaps one final cup of spiced wine before rest. As you walk, the snow begins to fall again, gentle and thin, each flake turning briefly to gold before it disappears. By midday, the castle has settled into a slow rhythm, the kind that follows great celebration. The air smells of melted wax, bread, and faint traces of pine. The long tables in the great hall are mostly cleared, but a few stubborn guests linger, hunched over cups of ale or hunks of cold meat, still unwilling to let the day go quiet. Outside the windows, the snow has stopped, leaving the world blank and still, as if time itself has paused to rest. You walk through the hall, passing a pair of servants sweeping the rushes into neat piles. Their brooms make a steady, whispering sound against the floor. One hums softly to herself, the same tune that the musicians played the night before. It lingers in the air like perfume. Near the hearth, the jester sits with his legs stretched out, idly toying with one of his bells. His hat is beside him, folded neatly for once. He glances up as you approach. "The world feels quieter now," he says. "Almost too quiet. Yesterday, laughter was thicker than smoke in this hall, and today I can hear my own heartbeat." "Is that a bad thing?" you ask. He smiles faintly. "Not bad, just different. The silence after a song always feels too long, even when it's beautiful." According to a personal letter written by a minstrel in the late 14th century, this quiet day after the feast was sometimes called Peace Day. It was a day for healing, for stillness, for remembering the world outside the walls of the hall. The kitchens cooled, the fires lowered, and conversation softened into something tender and slow. The jester looks toward the fire, watching the embers pulse. "When I was a boy," he says, "my mother used to tell me that the morning after Christmas was the time when angels gathered the laughter of men and carried it back to heaven. Maybe that's why it always feels emptier now." You nod. Maybe the silence is just the sound of them flying away. He laughs quietly, but his eyes remain on the fire. "If that's true, then I hope they come back next year. This old place would crack without noise." A few servants nearby overhear him and smile. One of them, a young woman stacking pewter cups, says softly, "It won't crack. The stone remembers." She taps the wall affectionately with her knuckles. "It keeps the warmth inside, even when we forget." Her words stay with you. The castle truly feels alive in its silence, as if holding its breath after the long joy of the night before. The faint scent of roasted apples and pine still lingers in the air, reminders of warmth and company. A curious note from an abbey chronicle describes this day as a pause between fire and frost. Monks who visited noble households for the feast often stayed on for the day after, recording the strange calm that followed the noise. One wrote, "It is like the breath between two verses of a hymn." The jester stands slowly, stretching his arms. "Time for me to earn my bread," he says. "There will be children in the village waiting for tricks, and they do not pay in laughter alone." He picks up his hat and places it on his head with a small bow. "If I do not return, tell the fire I missed it." Then he winks and disappears through the side door, leaving the faint jingle of bells behind. You stay by the hearth, letting the heat wash over your hands. The flames are small now, steady and content. A servant adds a single log, and the fire answers with a quiet sigh. The light dances across the polished metal of the cups and spoons, still waiting to be cleaned. According to household records, it was common for nobles to grant their servants rest on this day, at least until sunset. It was believed that overwork after the feast would anger the spirits of the season, who required silence and gratitude before the New Year's labours began. Perhaps it was simply kindness disguised as superstition. A small group of children enters the hall, their cheeks red from the cold. They carry baskets of twigs and scraps, collecting what remains from the feast to take back to their families. One of them stops to stare at the fire, his eyes wide with fascination. "It looks alive," he whispers. You nod and smile. It is, in a way. The boy grins and runs after his friends, his laughter echoing faintly against the stone. You watch him go, the sound brightening the quiet for a brief moment before fading again into stillness. Outside, a pale sunlight spreads across the snow. The air looks clean, almost new. You step toward the window and see a handful of villagers walking up the road, carrying baskets of food and small gifts. Bread, cheese, dried herbs. They are coming to thank the Lord for the feast, though most of them will leave their offerings at the gate. It is an old custom, half gratitude and half hope. Some historians suggest that such gestures blurred the line between generosity and survival. The feast was not only a display of wealth, but a promise that those within the walls would care, at least briefly, for those beyond them. It was a fragile kindness, but it mattered. You stay at the window for a while, watching the light move across the snow. The silence feels full now, not empty, a space where everything that has happened still hums quietly, like the echo of a bell that has already stopped ringing. When you turn back to the hall, the servants have finished their cleaning. The rushes are fresh again, the tables bare. Only the fire remains, burning low but steady, waiting for night to fall. The afternoon sun lies pale and low, sliding gently along the castle walls. Shadows stretch thin across the courtyard, and the cold air glows with a faint shimmer, the kind that makes every breath visible. The world feels slower now, balanced between warmth and frost, life and quiet. You walk toward the outer gate, where the last of the Christmas visitors are preparing to leave. The porter stands by the entrance, his hands tucked into his sleeves. He nods as each traveller passes, his breath forming soft clouds that vanish almost as soon as they appear. Horses stamp against the snow, impatient to move. The creak of leather and the muffled thud of hooves mix with the low murmur of farewells. According to letters written by travellers in the 15th century, the day after Christmas was often filled with departure. Guests who had come for the feast would ride home through fields of snow, carrying gifts wrapped in cloth and the heavy comfort of too much food. The journey could be long and perilous, but no one wished to linger past the turning of the feast. The rhythm of duty called them back to the world beyond the walls. A young squire helps his master mount a horse, fastening the cloak at his shoulders. The nobleman turns to the steward and says, "Your lord's hearth burns bright. May next winter's fire find me here again." The steward bows, smiling with the weary grace of one who has heard the same words 100 times. "It will, my lord." The hearth remembers its guests. Curiously, in some regions of England and France, household customs demanded that departing guests take a small piece of wood or coal from the fire to ensure warmth in their own homes. This act was both blessing and superstition, a way of carrying the castle's luck across the frozen land. You stand aside as the riders file through the gate, their horses sending up sprays of snow with every step. The sound fades into the open air, leaving only the echo of jingling harness and distant voices. For a brief moment, the castle seems emptier, the space they leave behind filled only with wind. The porter closes the heavy gates with a grunt, sliding the bolt into place. "That's that," he mutters, brushing frost from his beard. "Peace until 12th night." You ask if he misses the noise. He chuckles softly. Noise? No. But laughter, yes. It keeps the walls warm even after everyone's gone. A record from a steward's account in 1409 describes how the castle's warmth was said to linger long after the feast, as if laughter soaked into the very stones. Some believed that the sound of joy softened the wind for days afterward, carrying a kind of invisible blessing to all who slept within earshot. The courtyard grows quiet again. Only a few servants remain, sweeping away the traces of horses and gathering the last of the discarded rushes. The smell of pine and smoke clings faintly to the air. Above, a single hawk circles lazily against the pale sky, its cry sharp but distant. You wander along the wall walk, where the snow lies untouched. The land below stretches white and endless, dotted only by the dark lines of hedgerows and the glimmer of a frozen stream. The view feels vast, but the silence holds it close, as if the world itself is resting after its own long celebration. Somewhere in the lower courtyard, a dog barks once, then lies down beside the stable door. A bell rings from the chapel, thin and far away. The rhythm of the castle has returned to normal, the brief holiday folded neatly into memory. You pause to rest your hands on the cold stone of the battlement. The surface is rough, edged with frost, yet beneath it you can feel the faint thrum of warmth from within the walls. The fires below burn softly, unseen but steady. According to an anonymous monk who once served as chaplain to a noble family, such moments were the true heart of winter, the hush after joy, the calm that followed the feast. He wrote, "When silence returns, God walks again among men, gentle as the falling snow." You stay there for a while, watching the light fade. The sun slips lower, turning the snow from white to gold, then to grey. In the distance, smoke rises from village chimneys, small spirals against the evening sky. Life beyond the castle has already resumed its rhythm. Animals fed, fires lit, bread baking for the next day. The season of plenty narrows again into the daily work of survival. The porter passes behind you, humming an old tune. "The lord and lady will dine soon," he says. "Not a feast tonight, just stew and bread, quiet food for a quiet heart." You nod, understanding. Even celebration needs to rest, to catch its breath before beginning again. When he leaves, the world feels utterly still. Only the faint whistle of wind fills the silence. You look once more over the frozen fields and feel something like gratitude settle deep within you, not for the splendor of the feast, but for the peace that follows it. Inside the walls, the fires glow softly against the gathering dusk. Outside, the snow waits, unbroken and pure. Between them stands the castle, sturdy and calm, its heart still warm from all that has passed. Evening settles once more, soft and blue like a sigh drawn over the castle. The day's calm has deepened into something quieter still. The rushes underfoot no longer smell of feast or smoke, but of frost and fading pine. A few candles flicker along the corridor, their flames small and steady. From somewhere below comes the faint clatter of bowls being washed and set to dry. You walk toward the great hall, curious to see how it looks now that all revelry has faded. The doors stand open, and the air inside feels cooler. The long tables have been stripped of linen and plate, leaving only smooth wood polished by years of touch. The great fire still burns, but lower now, a mound of red and orange coals breathing slowly in the vast hearth. The steward stands nearby, his sleeves rolled up, a ledger open in his hands. He is counting what remains: candles, cups, barrels of ale, sacks of grain. His voice murmurs numbers softly to himself, the same rhythm over and over. You step closer, and he glances up with a tired but good-natured smile. "The feast is finished, but the reckoning has only begun," he says. According to surviving estate accounts, Stewards in noble houses spent days after great feasts measuring the cost of generosity. Every spice, every bolt of linen, every cask of wine had to be noted. A careless entry could mean trouble later, for the Lord's purse was never as deep as his appetite. The steward dips his quill into ink and continues writing. 3 pounds of honey, he mutters. 5 jars of salt, one missing. He sighs and rubs his forehead. The cook will swear she used it all for the pudding, but I suspect the dogs feasted too. You watch him work for a moment, then glance toward the upper gallery. The garlands of ivy still hang there, though wilted, their berries dull now in the dim light. The shadows cast by the fire stretch long and thin across the walls. Curiously enough, in some surviving letters from noble households, stewards wrote that the quiet after the feast was their favorite time. When the guests are gone, one wrote, the house feels like itself again. The noise settles into the stones, and the fire hums like a servant at peace. You can almost hear that hum now, a soft rhythm pulsing under the stillness. The steward closes the ledger at last and places it carefully on the table. Done for now, he says. Tomorrow we count again, but tonight I'll let the ink dry and the numbers rest. He pours a small cup of wine from a jug and offers it to you. To keeping order in chaos, he says. You take the cup. The wine is simple and dark, still faintly spiced from the feast. Its warmth fills your chest. A servant enters quietly, carrying a broom. She pauses when she sees the steward. The Lord asked that the hall stay lit till midnight, she says softly. He says it should not go dark so soon after Christmas. The steward nods. Then let it burn, he answers, but gently. We have had enough roaring for one season. He leaves the hall, and you remain by the hearth. The servant begins to sweep, the sound of the broom gentle, almost soothing. You sip your wine and watch the fire settle lower, the embers glowing like the eyes of sleeping beasts. According to a record of domestic customs from northern England, some households believed it unlucky to let the Yule fire die completely on the night after Christmas. Instead, the embers were banked and covered with ash, kept alive to ensure good fortune for the year ahead. The belief was practical as much as mystical. A spark saved effort come morning. The servant finishes sweeping and sits for a moment on the lowest step of the dais, her broom across her knees. She stares into the fire with a faint smile, her face softened by the glow. It feels different now, she says quietly, as if the hall is breathing slower. You nod. The castle is tired too. She laughs softly. Maybe, or maybe it's listening. She tilts her head, and for a moment you both sit in silence. The air is filled with tiny sounds, the crack of cooling wood, the faint sigh of wind outside, the slow hiss of coals settling. It feels as if the castle itself is exhaling, releasing the weight of celebration into calm. Some historians of medieval domestic life have written that the greatest marvel of those stone halls was not their size, but their silence. When the fires dimmed and the guests departed, the echo of every voice seemed to linger in the air, folded gently into the walls. Perhaps that is why people spoke softly after feasts, afraid to disturb what still listened. The servant rises and throws a few small logs onto the fire. Sparks leap upward, bright and brief. The hall brightens for a moment, then settles again into its soft rhythm. She gathers her broom and wishes you good night before disappearing down the corridor. You finish the last sip of wine. The fire's warmth seems to hum against your skin, lulling you into stillness. You let your eyes wander one last time across the empty hall, the long tables, the garlands, the banners swaying faintly in the air that seeps through the cracks. It feels alive in its quiet, like a great heart that has slowed to rest. You place your empty cup on the table and move toward the door. Behind you, the embers pulse gently, each glow a heartbeat fading into calm. The castle at night has returned to stillness. The corridors that once echoed with footsteps and laughter now hold only the soft sound of the wind brushing against stone. You carry a candle through the passage that leads to the upper chambers. Its flame wavers slightly as you climb, painting small halos of gold on the cold grey walls. The air smells faintly of smoke, melted wax, and distant pine. At the landing, a narrow window looks out over the courtyard. You pause there for a moment. The snow has hardened into a thin crust, glittering in the moonlight. A few faint tracks cross the yard, servants, perhaps, finishing their work before sleep. From one of the towers comes the muted toll of a bell, marking the hour. The sound rolls through the stone, slow and deep. You move on toward the solar, the private room where the Lord and Lady often spend their final hours before rest. The door is half open. Inside, the light of a single fire glows across the chamber, dim and steady. The lady sits by the hearth, her back to you, brushing her hair in long, unhurried strokes. The firelight catches the threads of her gown and makes them shimmer like quiet water. The Lord sits nearby, leaning back in a carved chair, his eyes half closed. Between them stands a small table with a jug of wine, 2 cups, and a bowl of dried fruit. Their voices are low, blending with the crackle of the fire. According to the journals of visiting clerics, it was common for noble couples to share a final meal or conversation in private after the feast. This was their time to breathe, to set aside ceremony and speak plainly. The priest might have his prayers, the servants their laughter, but the Lord and Lady had this silence, this space to remember what it meant to simply be human again. You step quietly inside. The lady looks up and smiles faintly. "You walk like a ghost," she says. "Come, sit a while. The night grows long." You take a chair near the wall, close enough to feel the warmth of the fire. The Lord opens his eyes and nods in greeting. "The hall sleeps," he murmurs. It feels strange, after so much noise. The castle almost feels too large again. His wife finishes brushing her hair and sets the comb aside. "It always does, after Christmas. I think the silence is part of the season. It's how joy teaches us to listen." Her words drift softly into the air, and for a time, no one speaks. The fire shifts, sending a thin thread of sparks up the chimney. A curious note from a 14th century household record describes how some nobles found the aftermath of celebration more meaningful than the feast itself. They would speak of generosity, of neighbours and tenants, or of those who had died in the year before. Gratitude, they said, belonged to the quiet more than the noise. The Lord reaches for the jug and pours a cup of wine. He hands it to his wife, then fills another for himself. "Do you remember our first Christmas here?" he asks her. "The roof leaked and the kitchen flooded." She laughs softly. "And we only had one goose for everyone. So you made the steward cut it into 12 pieces. He said he'd never seen a lord so determined to keep peace through arithmetic." He smiles. Peace and hunger often travel together. According to family letters preserved in old archives, humour between noble couples was a sign of deep affection, a small rebellion against the stiffness of rank. To share laughter was to admit that neither wealth nor title could hold back the ordinary absurdities of life. The lady lifts her cup, gazing into the fire. "I wonder," she says quietly, "what our children will remember. Will they remember the feasts or the waiting afterward?" The Lord's voice softens. "They will remember warmth. That is enough." Outside, the wind rises, rattling gently at the shutters. The flames tremble, then steady. You feel the room grow warmer, not from the fire but from the ease between them. Their silence carries the weight of a long partnership, shaped by years of shared winters. Historians who study domestic life in medieval castles often point to this intimacy as the true centre of noble households. Beyond the grandeur and the ceremony, it was these small, unguarded moments that defined their humanity. The lords of record books were rulers, but the people in rooms like this were simply two souls watching firelight fade together. The lady turns toward you. "Tell me," she says softly, "how did the servants fare last night? I hope they kept some wine for themselves." "They did," you reply, "and they sang until the fire fell asleep." "Good," she says with a smile. "The house breathes better when laughter reaches every room." Her husband nods. A good castle should sound like life, not stone. The lady leans her head lightly against his shoulder. The firelight wavers across their faces, softening the lines of age, blurring lord and lady into something more timeless. In the quiet, you hear the faint whistle of wind slipping down the chimney, mingling with the hum of the flames. The air feels heavy with peace, the kind that arrives only after all duties are done. After a while, the Lord speaks again. Tomorrow we ride to the village with bread and candles. It's a small gift, but I'd rather carry warmth outward than keep it locked here. His wife nods. Then we shall go together. You watch the two of them sit in silence, their shadows stretching long across the floor. The night has grown deep, but it feels kind, as if the world itself has slowed its breathing to match theirs. When at last you stand to leave, they both smile. Sleep well, the lady says softly. The fire will keep watch. You bow slightly and step into the corridor. Behind you, the door closes with a gentle thud, and the faint murmur of their voices fades into the heartbeat of the castle. The castle sleeps again, quieter than ever. Outside, the snow has deepened, smoothing the earth into gentle curves that glimmer beneath the moon. Inside, every chamber glows faintly with the last warmth of dying fires. The feast, the music, the laughter, each has folded itself neatly into memory. What remains now is the long, slow heartbeat of winter. You walk the upper corridor one final time. The rushes underfoot whisper softly, the sound like breathing. The torches have been extinguished, leaving only the faint silver light of the moon seeping through the arrow slits. The air tastes cold but clean, touched with wood smoke and pine resin. It is a scent that speaks of endings and rest. Down in the courtyard, the snow lies untouched again, hiding the tracks of yesterday's horses and feet. The well gleams faintly in the starlight. Beyond the walls, the forest stands silent, its branches heavy with frost. You feel the strange peace that follows exhaustion, when even thought begins to quiet itself. According to an old chronicle of household customs, the final night of Christmas in a noble home was never loud. It was a vigil of gratitude, a time for quiet conversation and reflection before ordinary days returned. The joy of the feast was not forgotten, but gently folded away like a well-loved garment. You stop by a window and look out across the sleeping landscape. The village below the hill glows faintly from a few scattered fires. Somewhere, a dog barks once, and then the world falls silent again. The stars look close enough to touch, cold and unmoving. From far within the keep, you hear the faint murmur of the chapel bell. It rings not for ceremony now, but for habit, marking the passing of time. The sound feels softer tonight, almost like a lullaby meant for the walls themselves. A monk once wrote in his winter diary that the night after Christmas was the truest peace, when even the fire prays in silence. You think he must have known what this moment feels like. The air carries a stillness that is almost sacred, yet gentle enough to let you breathe easily. You pass the great hall and glance inside. The embers glow faintly in the vast hearth. No flames now, only soft light like the heart of a sleeping creature. The garlands droop, their leaves crisp and pale, but they still give off a faint smell of evergreen. You can almost hear the laughter of the night before hiding somewhere within the stones. A single servant crosses the far end of the room, carrying a small lantern. She pauses, looks at the fire, and whispers something you cannot hear before leaving through the side door. The glow of her lantern fades down the corridor until it becomes one with the dark. You stand for a while by the hearth, letting its last warmth touch your face. The silence hums gently, the sound of peace settling deep into the bones of the castle. Every sound that might have broken it, laughter, clinking cups, footsteps, feels far away now, softened by the hush of snow and sleep. Some historians call this the truest legacy of the medieval Christmas. Not its splendor, but its calm. The feast was fleeting, the quiet after was eternal. In that silence, people remembered what warmth meant. The fire gives a final sigh, a faint crack, and then falls still. You turn and walk toward the staircase, the last glow of the embers flickering across the floor behind you. The corridor feels almost timeless, as though every Christmas that has ever been now lingers here in this one breath of peace. Outside, snow begins to fall again, gentle and steady. It gathers along the window sills and settles into the corners of the courtyard. The flakes drift silently, each one catching the faint light before it disappears. The world is falling asleep under its own white blanket. You pause by the doorway once more, taking one last look at the castle, the sleeping fire, the shadows, the glimmer of frost along the walls. It feels alive, not in noise or motion, but in the stillness it holds. Every story told, every prayer whispered, every song sung has left its trace here. The night seems to breathe with memory. Then, you step outside. The cold air fills your lungs, sharp and pure. Above you, the stars shimmer like sparks caught in glass. The sound of the wind is soft and low, curling around the towers like a lullaby. The snow crunches under your boots as you walk across the courtyard. Behind you, the castle stands solid and calm, a monument to both joy and rest. You stop in the center and close your eyes for a moment, feeling the peace of it seep into you. And in that stillness, you understand what all the feasting, the songs, the stories, and the prayers were for. They were meant to lead here to this silence, this deep, unbroken calm where the heart of winter and the warmth of humanity meet. The bell rings once more. The sound fades slowly into the snowy night, carried away like a breath. The story slows now. The last candle has burned low, and the world beyond the castle lies wrapped in sleep. The air feels softer, as if the snow itself hushes every sound. You stand there for a while, breathing in the cold until it no longer bites, only soothes. Imagine the faint glow of the hearth behind you, its warmth fading gently, not lost but resting. The walls around you hold centuries of breath, laughter, and quiet. They are listening now, just as you are. The night is no longer heavy. It feels like a blanket laid across the shoulders of the earth. Your footsteps grow slower as you walk toward the gate. Each crunch of snow beneath your boots becomes a heartbeat, steady and calm. The moon has climbed higher, bathing the castle in silver. Every icicle glitters softly. Every shadow smooths into peace. You stop once more, turn back, and let your eyes rest on the towers outlined against the stars. Inside, people sleep safely, their dreams warmed by the memory of fire and song. Even the wind has quieted, as though unwilling to disturb the rest that has finally settled here. Take a deep breath. Let the cold air fill your lungs, and then release it slowly. Feel the stillness around you. Let your mind drift with it, light as snow. Soon you will sleep too, carrying this peace with you, the echo of laughter, the shimmer of candlelight, the quiet rhythm of falling snow. The castle fades into the dark, but its warmth lingers somewhere deep inside you, like an ember waiting for morning. Good night. Sleep well. May your dreams be warm and gentle,